So a friend and I, both 21 and female, went to Applebee's for a few $1 margaritas, then went off to a park where she said that she knew a spot. We go 20 minutes away to this park. We go down this path that takes us around 10 minutes to this bay area. We find a nice log and we sit there and we watch the sunset. As we were relaxing on the log, a family strolls by with their dog to hang out on the other side of the shore or whatever. A few minutes go by and a couple comes through and sets up. They eat a big pineapple with a knife, but the sun sets, it's still light out, but we didn't think about the walk back. And eventually we go to head back and it's dark at this point. Now, the wooden area that we have to walk through is getting really dark. So we start walking and she gets her phone camera out. It's pitch black at this point in this forest. We start talking about how creepy it actually was. And it was around this point that I felt an uneasy feeling. That feeling you get, afraid that something is behind you. Well, we're walking along and we go across the bridge up a little hill and all of a sudden we hear loud, fast footsteps on the bridge. I see light from what appeared to be from a phone, and it was moving back and forth as if somebody was sprinting. We panicked, we started running, and I'm thinking, no way this guy's chasing us. And I know that this is going to sound a bit weird, but his footsteps kind of sounded like he was on a bike maybe or something. I thought, we'll go up this steep hill on our left. There's no way that this guy's following us and no way that he would go up this hill on his bike. Turns out, there was no bike. We stopped running as we didn't hear anything. She flashes her light behind us and there's a silhouette of a man now jogging toward us. His body posture seemed to be like he got tired from running. So we kept running and stopping to see if he was still chasing us. And then again we hear footsteps running toward us. We keep looking back while running to make sure that he's not right on us. At this point, my friend screamed hey in a sort of panicked voice, and he screamed back hey as well, and then after that said, "What, are you scared?" We keep running. She's on the phone with the police. We finally hit a paved road, nowhere near her car, when I took us up the hill. That was on the wrong path we originally took. We knock on a house, lights are on but nobody answers, so we quickly start down the road to their neighbor. I look back and see a silhouette of a man walking behind that first person's house. He eventually got up to the fence and then creeped back into the darkness. That second neighbor, they helped us. His wife got us some water, and the police, they came to take us to her car. And that was the most traumatic experience I think I've ever had. The intentions of the man felt sinister, no doubt, and the way he was yelling at us felt so uncanny. I hate this feeling that I have, and I have so many questions that I know won't be answered. But I just cannot get this one question out of my head. What if he did actually catch up to us? What would have happened? So my dad had 3 consecutive heart attacks in the emergency room in the hospital. The date, June of 2021. The doctors do not expect him to come home, yet he defies them, and 3 weeks later, he is home and under the care of palliative nursing staff, along with my mum and myself. During the next 5 months before he left us, I would walk into the room and he would be fully engrossed in a conversation with the invisibles, as we called them. Like one time he said that the room was full of Mexican people with food, but he wasn't sure that he liked Mexican food. I told him to tell them to go away, and one time he introduced me to the 2 invisibles that he said were fighter pilots. Dad said that his dad had been to see him, my uncle that my dad said traveled thousands of miles to see Dad, and despite all of this last one was definitely the clincher. So 2 days before Dad had passed, Dad was in his chair and I was sitting on his bed. "Who are all these people?" he asked me. "I don't know, Dad. They're invisibles, so why don't you ask one?" My dad turns away from me and says, "Excuse me, young man. Sorry to bother you, but what is your name?" There's a brief pause and my dad turns to me and says, "He says that his name is Andrew." "That's nice," I respond. "What does Andrew do?" he asked me. "I don't know, Dad. I can't see him." "Why don't you ask him?" He turns away from me and then says, "Excuse me, Andrew, what do you do?" There's a pause, and Dad, with his hand to his ear, leans forward and says, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." He then turned to me and said, He's gone." That was on a Tuesday, and 2 days later, Dad had passed. But this is where the story gets a bit freaky. So, my brother and his second wife show up on Saturday so that we can go to the funeral home and make final arrangements. I leave to put on my makeup and come back into the room 10 minutes later to Mum, my brother, and his second wife sobbing. "What did you say?" I asked my brother. All choked up, he said that he just got off the phone with his first wife, and the youngest son, Andrew, he had been hit at a crosswalk and died 7 days prior to Dad's death. Honestly, I couldn't even tell my brother until later when she had him created and buried before I told him. I personally believe that Andrew didn't want to tell his grandpa that he was dead, and that's why Dad didn't hear him. I think Andrew realized that we hadn't been told of his death and he wasn't going to tell his grandpa. That is, unless Dad didn't want to tell us. His first wife wouldn't let the kids, 5 kids they had together, see my parents, so it's no wonder Dad didn't recognize him too. So yes, I do believe in the afterlife. I just need to finish what I need to do here before I get my turn, I guess. I hope my mum and dad have a really excellent place to live when I get there too. Anyway, thanks for listening. It's a very hard story to share, and it's good to finally get it off my chest a bit. This happened a couple of weeks ago. So I was heading home from my friend's house one night, around 11:30 p.m. My friend lives about 25 minutes from me, and the fastest way to get home is if I take back roads from there. I live in a small rural town. Anyways, I'm driving home with another car about maybe 4 car lengths in front of me. I'm about 5 minutes from my house when I see the car's taillights suddenly break, then the car speeds off and turns off of a road to where I couldn't see it anymore. I didn't think too much of it. I mean, maybe a raccoon ran out in front of them and they didn't want to hit it. As I get to the part of the road where that car slammed on their brakes, a man, a huge man, probably 6+ feet tall in a black hoodie, jumps in front of my car, flailing his arms and yelling at me. I swerve to the right to not hit him, and I look in my rear view and he's gone. This road does have houses, but where this man was, there were none. No streetlights, no broken down car, nothing. I raced home and called my husband, who was about 2.5 hours away at an event and wouldn't be home until after midnight. I told him what happened and how he just disappeared, and I was terrified to get out of my car to walk out into our house. He stayed on the phone with me until I got inside and immediately headed home too. There's been a lot of weird break-ins around my area lately too, and people trying to steal cars as well. I can't even imagine what would have happened if I stopped my car. Not that I ever would. I mean, I've seen too many true crime documentaries to do that. I avoid taking that way home now, and if I do, honestly, that's pretty much all I think about. The last house that I lived in with my parents was haunted, and I mean severely haunted. When we first moved in and I was left to sit with the stuff while my parents made trips, even though it was empty, I had never been more afraid. I knew that there were things there. I could feel it, and I was terrified. Not long after we moved in, it all started kicking off too. Stuff would move on its own, and I don't mean just things that weren't stable. I had seen it, and my mum had seen it, but my dad still said that he didn't believe in it, until one night, when we were all watching TV, we looked into the hall all at the same time, and the car keys lifted off the cabinet and fell on the floor like someone had picked them up and dropped them. My dad hadn't seen this happen before, and his response was nervously, "Right, that's it, we're going to bed." Then there was the thing in the bathroom mirror. So I was cleaning my teeth before bed, and I looked into the mirror, and there was this thing that looked like a little kid with long hair, but its eyes were pure black. Scared the life out of me. But what was even weirder was that when I looked into my wardrobe and there was a crumpled red dress with blue butterflies on it, exactly like what that thing was wearing. It wasn't mine, mind you, and it looked like it would be the right size for maybe a 5-year-old. Once I saw an apparition in the doorway to my parents' bedroom that looked like a woman with long hair holding a knife. I screamed and tried to run, but ended up tripping and falling down the stairs. I told my dad I got spooked by a spider, but then my mum asked when he wasn't around, and when I told her, she wasn't surprised because she sometimes felt that there was someone in the bedroom with her when she was by herself. My dollhouse, it used to open by itself when it was latched. The latch worked fine and was sometimes so stiff that I had to pull on it to get it off, but it would just open when I wasn't even there, near it. My mum didn't believe me until she saw it, and she was startled by it. Something used to play with the bathroom tap too, and it wasn't the tap being dodgy or whatever. It was old and stiff, and a lot of the time took 2 people to just turn it on. The most memorable time, though, was when I was about to head out the door to high school when nobody else was up and the tap turned on. I shouted up the stairs, "Please, now's not the time. I'll get in trouble for leaving the tap on." And amazingly, it actually turned off. Another time when I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, I was about to leave and suddenly I got this, like a strange overwhelming urge to sit down, and as soon as I did, I put my hand out and felt drips of water falling on my hand. I told my mum about it, and she said that it was something related to spirits, but I can't remember exactly what. A lot of the time, both me and my mum would avoid going upstairs, though, because we'd stand at the bottom of the stairs and we'd just get this awful, uneasy feeling that something didn't want us up there. And so, we would just wait. I'll end this by saying that I don't experience hallucinations, I don't have any form of psychosis or schizophrenia, and nothing like this has happened since moving out of that place. And quite honestly, I'm just happy that that place is somebody else's problem now. So this happened to my friend, not me, in 2007. To this day, she describes what she saw in the exact same as she had right after it happened, and can still clearly picture it as well. So, she was walking home from her friend's house at night. This is in a town in southern Oregon, in case that's important, but she doesn't remember the exact time, but says that it was definitely after midnight, and it was dark, so nobody else was out. She says that she was completely sober, and not sleep-deprived or anything. She was on her way home, and just about 2 blocks from her house, she was walking on the sidewalk along the main street and was crossing between 5th and 6th Street. Her house is on 7th. Across the street is a Safeway and a cemetery, and right then she noticed something about 50 feet ahead of her, crossing the street from the cemetery side to the side that she was on. And this is how she describes it. There were 2 creature things walking on their hind legs side by side. One was slightly shorter than the other, but they were both really tall, at least 7 feet. They were hunched over, lanky and extremely thin. She says that her immediate first thought was they looked almost like deer walking on their hind legs, but they didn't have any fur. It was more like a dark grayish skin. They held their arms and wrists kind of like how a T-Rex would, but their arms and hands were very long still, almost as long as their legs. When I asked, she said that she didn't see any tails. I asked her if they had hooves, and she says that she thinks so, but can't remember that part for certain. Everything was quiet, and she didn't hear them making any sounds on the pavement as they walked. I asked her if they had any antlers or deer-like shaped face, me thinking that maybe it actually was just hairless deer walking on their hind legs for some reason. She said no antlers though, and their heads were not shaped like a deer's or any animal, but more like a person's. She describes their faces as looking human, with human features, but something was just slightly off. She had frozen where she was as soon as she saw them. Everything was quiet and there were no cars driving by or anyone else around, which is pretty normal at night in our small town. But she says that she stood there kind of in shock. She watched as the two creatures slowly walked side by side, silently from across the street and over to the side of the street that she was on. She says that they didn't seem to see her at all, or if they did notice her, they didn't act at all like they did. She says that they acted as if they were simply a couple going on a casual night stroll together. She doesn't remember feeling any negative energy or vibes. She just felt fear because she was, well, pretty scared by what she saw. As soon as they finished crossing the street, they continued straight down 6th Street, and she couldn't see them after they passed the first house and kept walking down. At that point, she said that she snapped out of the shock and started running the one more block towards 6th Street to see where they were going. Once there, she turned down 6th Street to follow them, but at this point, they were completely gone. She doesn't know where they could have possibly gone that fast though, considering that they were just walking. And not walking fast, but like I said, almost as if the two of them were just out on a casual night stroll. As soon as she realized that they had somehow disappeared out of nowhere though, she started running as fast as she could the one more block to her house on 7th Street. She told her mum and sister the next morning, and she says that these creatures were like nothing she had ever seen or heard of before. The closest thing that she could compare it to is a werewolf, like the one that Professor Lupin changes into the Harry Potter movies, hairless, super lanky and hunched over strangely. Except these ones had more human-like heads or faces than a wolf. She's only ever told her family and a few friends, me being one of them, about this. And also, she has no history of any mental illness or anything. But whenever I ask her about it, she describes it the exact same way, and is still pretty shook up when she thinks about it. Also, nothing like that has happened to her before or since then. Does anyone know what this could have been, though? I've heard about not deers on Reddit, but I'm not sure that that really fits because I think that those are more animal-like shaped and usually on all fours, right? If you guys have any questions, then I'm happy to ask her and get back to you. But any input would be greatly appreciated as both of us, I'll admit, are a bit lost. So I worked for Disney many years ago and was sent to take still photos of the Queen Mary for locations reference purposes. As part of the assignment, I was privately taken around the ship to various off-limits to the public areas by a very friendly and jovial security guard. We had been at it for about an hour when he took me up to the bridge. It was a cool autumn late afternoon and there was a slight breeze in the dusky air. The control room or wheelhouse was locked, so I wasn't able to go inside. Instead, I was taking photos of the interior through an exterior window. The security guard, who was with me, he got called to another part of the ship and had to leave me alone for a moment. He promised to return in about 15 minutes. Shooting through the window, I had my back to the captain's walk, which is where we came up from. I was looking through the camera viewfinder, which meant that I completely lost visual contact with what was immediately around me. Taking photos, I heard footsteps over my shoulder to my right, and I figured the security guard had returned. Then I felt a hand on my right shoulder, and obviously that completely startled me. I dropped the camera into my left hand and swung my right hand backward to brush away the security guard's hand, only to find that there was nobody there, just flags waving in the breeze and the quiet of the early evening. I shrugged the footsteps and the feeling of the hand on my shoulder off as a very convincing figment of my imagination. When the security guard eventually returned, I told him about what had happened, and his demeanor changed from jovial to quite serious. "Let's get out of here," he said, nervously. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me that there were ghost stories about the captain's walk, that people have seen the former captain of the Queen Mary on the walk in the early evenings patrolling his bridge. And he also told me that some people reported feeling the presence of someone when nobody was there. Hearing that was enough for me too. I was more than happy to oblige our getting out of there and finishing the rest of the tour as quickly as possible. One of my earliest memories as a child is from one time my grandparents left me home alone effectively when I was 4 or 5. I was playing in my room with some toys when suddenly I noticed a man outside my window. For context, my childhood home had an enclosed patio which I could see from my window. He couldn't have just gotten in other words. At this point, I'm terrified and just stay in my room, but he soon simply enters it. I don't remember his appearance too well, but I remember I called him the chicken head man because he had a mohawk haircut. He doesn't say nor do anything. He just stands there catatonic, turns around and then leaves. I, being a stupid kid, decided to follow him. He truly wasn't doing anything. He was just sort of pacing through our hallway. He would walk to my grandfather's office, my mum's room, and my room, and then just repeat it. Eventually, I got bored of following him, and I just went to my room, and he didn't come back. I don't really remember how scared I was, but according to my parents, I was freaked out. But anyways, after this happens and my mum comes back home, I tell her about the chicken head man, and she is terrified. Turns out, she had been experiencing frequent night terrors where she would wake up and the same man would be sitting across the room staring at her. She decided that my encounter with him was enough proof that he was real, and she hired an exorcist to come and cleanse the house. And weirdly enough, I never had another encounter with the supernatural that I know of after that. This happened a long time ago, but the memory of it is still very much burned into me. I was young enough to still be sitting in those booster seats that you put your child in with the tray attachment for food. I was playing with a little toy car in the back seat of an old 1988 Honda Civic in my little car seat. We were on the road when suddenly and slowly a shadowy figure crossed over in front of me. The best way that I can describe it is that it was shaped like one of those Pac-Man ghosts, but black and with a pair of human-like eyes, no other facial features. It was small enough to fit on my kiddie tray thing that I was using as a race car track for my toy as it passed in front of me. Even then, I remember being freaked out since nothing in the car even remotely looked like that, nor could anything have reflected a shadow to look like what I had just seen. Of course, I immediately told my parents, who just simply brushed it off and didn't believe me. Even now, as I think of it more and more, I really still cannot explain it. The second time I saw it, it was a little while later. I can't remember how much later, but I know that I had outgrown the booster seat by this point, but was still sitting in the back of the car. I was climbing into the back seat of that car when I saw it again. Only this time it was on the seats and much bigger than before, tall enough to cover the whole middle seat in its shadow. It was positioned almost as if it was looking out from behind the shadow being cast by the driver's seat, and only one eye showed this time. I completely lost it though, and quickly ran from that car to my parents' confusion. Now, I knew that this couldn't possibly be a shadow being cast from something already in the car, and when I finally worked up the courage to look again with my parents, it was gone. To this day, I haven't had any paranormal encounters nearly as weird as that one. I'm not one to believe in ghosts or spirits, but even I can't begin to explain what it was that I saw then. That was the last time that I saw that ghost or whatever it was, and shortly after that, my father gave away that car to a friend of his. I don't know if ghosts can haunt cars or whatever, but if they can, then that car was for sure haunted. This isn't my first encounter in my life, but it definitely was the most convincing. I was in Okinawa for a few months, but one day some friends and I decided to go see Shuri Castle. It had burned down a while ago, so there wasn't much to see anymore, but we decided to go anyway. While wandering around, we came across these steps that led down to a pond. So we headed down to check it out when I noticed this path over to the left. I decided to follow it because, why not? And I noticed this hole, or maybe like an old entry into a room of some sort. It was barred up so you couldn't walk into it, but while I was looking, I noticed this dark mass. The room itself was already dark, but this mass was noticeably darker. I could also see a very strong energy coming from it, sort of, but after trying to figure out what it was for a few seconds, I called my friend over to see if he noticed it too. He said that he couldn't see anything, but when I tried to point it out, it sort of rushed me. At this point, I get chills throughout my entire body, and I begin feeling extremely sad all of a sudden, like I'm about to cry. My buddy noticed this change in me, and we honestly started laughing about the situation since it was kind of crazy, to be honest. We end up walking away and continuing down the main path towards the pond. I couldn't shake this feeling, though, of whatever I just encountered that it gave me. So on our way back, I decided to take another look, but this time it rushed me instantly, and it was there again. I turned around and went back to the main path, but whatever it was, it stayed with me. I began feeling like my energy was leaving my body, to the point that I had to sit in the middle of the path because I felt like I was about to pass out. I kept telling whatever it was to go away, that it wasn't allowed to follow me, but it wasn't listening, that's for sure. The rest of the day we spent in Naha, I just couldn't shake this thing too. Even when we got back to where we were staying, all night I could feel it watching me while I was trying to sleep. I asked my friend's wife, who was a local, to see if I could get a cleansing anywhere, and thankfully, she was able to help me out. It was just a really freaky situation and experience, and the energy that it gave off was extremely powerful, whatever it was. I've never felt something like that before, and I really hope to never encounter anything like it again. Back in 2018, I was 17 around that time. I was living in foster care. The group home was situated on a busy street, and despite living in the city, we had a backyard, basketball court, picnic table, and at the very back we even had some grass. The whole backyard, it was surrounded by 2-meter-tall chain-link fences. There were houses to the right and the left of ours. At the very back of the yard, on the other side of the fence, there was a public walking or biking path that stretched at least a dozen kilometers. This path, it would take you through this huge park, along the water, to the beach, etc. It was a very popular area for people to visit too. Now, I was a regular cannabis smoker, although I was always very well put together for a teenager. The group home workers agreed to turn a blind eye on me as long as I didn't make it obvious. So on weekend mornings, I'd go for a walk to the park behind the house. I'd roll up on a park bench and I would smoke. But one day, everything changed. It was a weekend morning as usual at 7 a.m. I made my way to my favorite park bench. I'm sitting there with my joint in my hand. It was quite windy and it kept lighting out. I was facing the water, about 100 meters of field between the waterfront and I, when I noticed a man stomping through the field, heading straight for me. He didn't seem like he was on a leisurely walk at all. I remember thinking to myself, 1, why is he not using the paved path? 2, why does it seem like he's walking straight towards me? 3, what is he holding? 4, is anybody else around? And at all that, panic ensued. He was holding something chunky in one of his hands. I looked around for someone, noticed an elderly woman walking from the direction of the group home. She was about 20 meters away from me, and I sped walk towards the woman. By the time that I got to her, the man, he had made it to the bench that I was sitting on. The woman kept walking towards the bench and I in the opposite direction. For a moment, I looked back to make sure the man wasn't following me, or worse. I see the man lay his brick down on a pile of rocks behind the bench. The woman stopped walking. I'm guessing that she had processed something peculiar was going on too. Thankfully, the man kept moving straight towards the boulevard and was no longer to be seen in the park. The woman, she then turns around and she looks at me with this sort of shocked stare in her eyes, and I remember feeling reassured by that. We both continued on with our days without saying a single word. But the same day at around 9 p.m, people aren't allowed to smoke within 10 meters of an entry to an establishment, and there was only one light in the backyard, so it was above the entry to the establishment, and this girl in my group home goes out for a smoke in the backyard, no lights on. And like 3 minutes later, she's banging on the door yelling, so I let her in obviously. She's freaking out. We're trying to get answers out of her, but it's hard. Then she explains that there was a man. He stood there on the path allegedly. She watched and stared, taking pulls of a cigarette. The man then starts walking towards her and starts climbing the fence. That's when I shared my story from that same morning. To be honest, I thought that I was just being paranoid at first. But when I heard that somebody had tried to hop the fence, and the guy was described to look very similar to the person that I saw, I truly believe that it was the same man. The workers on the shift that night, they called the police, and the police started patrolling the path at night. The group home added some garden lights in the back, and honestly, I just hope that this person never lays hands on anyone, because that wild look in his eyes, if he does, I really don't like to think about what might happen. I want to preface this story by saying that while I am pretty much agnostic on a good day and an atheist on a bad day, I am still a fan of horror, and I grew up in a fairly religious environment via a very evangelical Christian high school. So my point of view may be skewed by those influences, I'll admit. However, I do think whatever my fiancé and I witnessed was, at the very least, an extremely dangerous person. So, for context, I started college in the fall of 2018, going to a university in a somewhat rural area. The college itself, it sits on a large plot of land surrounded by farmland and vineyards, with sections that are forested and have sort of little trails running through them, and a creek that runs through the length of the school property even. The college has even had a murder victim dumped in one of the wooded areas on the campus, but that's a story for another day. Freshmen, though, were required to live on campus their first year, and one of the benefits of that was that we had unlimited access to the school cafeteria, aka the caf. The caf, it was pretty nice, boasting a salad bar, sandwich station, mini bakery, hot food with different menus daily, and pretty much every fountain drink that you can think of. I would get lunch and dinner there with my only friend at the time, and who is now my fiancé, might I add, and we began to notice this boy who was always at the caf alone. It wasn't uncommon to see students eating there alone. My school had pretty poor community outreach or school spirit, but something was just, I don't know, really off about this kid. Like, first off, he had a very distinct look. This is important too, because we recognized him multiple times over 3 years. His skin, it was extremely pale, and had this sort of waxy flesh look to it that I struggled to describe, almost like he was made of wax, but he also had red curly hair, insert ginger joke here, I know, but a mouth a little too large for his face, but what was the strangest thing about him were his eyes. They were the same color as his hair, that bright red auburn. His iris was almost too big for his eye, and his pupils, they were extremely dilated. His eyes had a sort of bulging look to them too, very similar to Mark Zuckerberg, like they were trying to escape his face almost. It's hard to describe here, but he just had a very I don't know, unsettling look to him. It just felt like there was something very wrong with him. Like there was nothing inside of him almost. But his appearance wasn't what caught our attention at first, to be honest. What caught our attention was the amount of food that this kid would eat. Of course, having unlimited access to food, some kids went really overboard, right? But this kid, he was on another level altogether. He always had 5 or 6 cups of juice, soda, coffee, and 3 or 4 plates piled with food. Mind you, he was not large or overweight, but he would clear every plate and then just sit in his booth alone, staring into space with his headphones in. That was another thing too. He always had this blank, sort of vacant expression, always staring into nothing. Whenever you walked past his booth, you could hear that the music from his headphones was on full blast. We began to notice too that no matter what time we went to the cafe, whether it be for a late night snack, a breakfast, a random afternoon craving, he was just always there, sitting alone in the ruins of his empty plates. And we weren't the only people who noticed this strange behavior too. By second semester, people began approaching him. At first, just some girls jokingly saying something to the effect of, "We strive to be on your level," referencing his eating habits, and he just stared at them blankly. People began to ask if he was okay, if he would like to join them, but he always just stared, sometimes with a sort of knowing smile on his face, but would never reply, leaving the students to depart awkwardly. Once I even witnessed one of the cafe attendants telling him that he needed to stop spending all his time there. My friend that I always ate with became my boyfriend in the end, and we began to theorize what exactly this kid's deal was. We said maybe mental illness, or maybe he was a competitive eater, or he was trying to bulk up or whatever, but his behavior seemed too empty, too neurotic to be explained away by any of these. Our main theory, the one that I subscribe to now, it didn't come till much later. My sophomore year, I opted to live on campus again, and in the middle of my second semester, that was when COVID hit. My school, they allowed us to remain on campus until the school year was up, and due to some personal reasons for not wanting to go home, I remained in my dorm, and my boyfriend joined me and we quarantined together. That time was honestly just so strange because our campus became an incredibly liminal space without all the other students. Some others remained with us, but on any given day you would walk the entire campus and not run into another soul. My boyfriend and I, we started running the wooded trails on campus to get some exercise too. And one day, we stopped on one of the trails to do some burpees. As we did so, the kid from the cafe emerged from the trees all of a sudden. Not on any trail, just walked out of the woods and started running toward us. This really caught us off guard because, we rarely saw anyone at this point, and he just made a beeline toward us. Right as he ran up on us, though, he just stopped, just smiled at us knowingly, as if we shared some joke. But it was not a smile. In fact, it was incredibly nasty, sinister even. I don't know if I felt that way because he had scared us, but something was definitely off. We had never spoken to him those times at the cafe, but he definitely seemed to recognize us. The other thing that was weird was that he was now jacked, way taller and just larger than he had ever been freshman year. And it wasn't just that he gained muscle, he just seemed like he scaled up a whole lot. Like he hit a massive growth spurt, which I suppose is plausible, but it just seemed really off. Anyway, we were both obviously shaken by the experience, and began to joke that he had been eating so much to store up energy so he could level up or something. And one of us, I forget which, but we suggested that he looked so strange because it was a demon wearing a human skin and was eating so much to build strength for his demonic powers, and that's how he grew so quickly. Like I said, it began as a joke, but the more that we discussed it, the more it just seemed to explain not only his odd appearance, but his odd behavior toward other students, the empty look in his eyes. But here's where things went from just weird to honestly downright terrifying. So my boyfriend and I forgot about him eventually and moved out of my dorm into an apartment a few blocks from school as we were still finishing, and because school was mostly online now obviously with COVID, and I liked the area. The same creek that ran the length of our school campus ran behind our complex, and as it was still COVID lockdown and we had nothing to do, we would often go on long walks up and down the creek. Now, one evening we went for a walk at dusk, and by the time that we got to the main road our apartment was on, it was completely dark. It was extremely quiet, and as we walked along the road, we saw that we were coming up on a man walking very slow and deliberate. My hackles were up immediately, as our apartment is in a pretty seedy area, and there was a lot of homeless and unstable people who sometimes hung out from the creek. And there was just something about his walk. It was so deliberate and predatory almost. As we crossed paths with the man, though, he walked even slower, and in the dim light of the street lamps, I realized that I recognized him as that same kid, that same waxy face and bulging eyes. I also realized that in one hand, he held a paper bag with something big and round in it, while in the other, he was holding a crowbar. Yeah, a crowbar. He slowed down even more as he passed us and turned his whole head and smiled at us. This time there was no mistake when I tell you that it was very threatening. It was the most sinister smile that I'd ever seen, in fact, and it had that same knowing in it, like he knew us and we shared some joke. He didn't say anything, just stared at us with his horrible eyes. I don't know if I just read too many creepypastas or if I'm overthinking things, but I knew on an animalistic level that he wanted to hurt us and wanted us to know that he could. After we passed him, we took off running, and when we returned to the apartment, we were both in a full-blown panic. Even my boyfriend, who tends to be pretty level-headed and skeptical, wanted to call the police at this stage. We did, and as soon as we began to explain the situation, we felt pretty foolish about it. They asked if he threatened us, and we said not verbally, but we felt threatened. Despite the absurdity of our call, they said that they would look into it because obviously there's not a lot of non-nefarious reasons to be walking around at night with a crowbar. But we never heard anything, and after that, we never saw him again. Now, to close this, I just think the whole thing is strange. How this kid kept showing up in our lives over 3 years, and always seemed to recognize us, always seemed to want to let us know that he knew us. I think as people, we know when there's just something off about a person, right? When there's nothing going on inside. People have said as much about sociopaths that they've had run-ins with. But I want to know what you guys think. Did I encounter the Antichrist leveling up, a demon, or just a really troubled kid who became a dangerous man? Maybe he was just a depressed kid, but I will hold firm that we were, at the very least, threatened by this guy, that he wanted to hurt us, and that we encountered something or someone very evil. But what do you guys think? Also, I did some rudimentary Google searches for police reports in the area for, assault with a crowbar or whatever, and some other things that might have related to that, but in the end, we couldn't find anything. This incident took place about 4 years ago. I was living with my college friends in a shared apartment, but then I got married and I started searching for a separate room to start our new journey as husband and wife. I rented a house, which was a big double-story cottage. The owner, an old couple, they were living in the ground floor and they gave us a room on the first floor. So me and my wife, we moved into this new house. There was nobody else living in that cottage other than the four of us, old couple, me and my wife. Everything was going great too until once I experienced something unusual happening at night. I just felt like somebody was present in our house for whatever reason. I felt like someone was watching us, observing us. It was a really weird feeling, but nothing else really happened, and so life just went on. One day though, my wife decided to visit her parents for a couple of weeks and she left home. I was alone that night, and after finishing the episode of The Big Bang Theory that I was watching, as usual, I went to go and sleep in my bed. It was now the middle of the night, and I was in a deep sleep, and I started feeling like someone was trying to hold my hand and legs. But in the deep sleep, I couldn't really feel much, I guess. But slowly, the grip on my hands and legs became more firm, and it became so firm that suddenly I woke up. And now I could feel 100% that someone was holding my hands and legs. I could barely breathe. I was also feeling like somebody was trying to stop my breathing. I got scared. My heartbeat increased violently and I started sweating. I suddenly remembered that I should speak the religious chants that I learned growing up, but not a single word was coming out of my mouth. I became more desperate and gathered all of my energy to speak chants, but I couldn't. And then I realized that I should speak religious chants in my mind, and this is where I started feeling relieved as the grip on my hands, legs, and on my throat began to loosen. I now began speaking, and I started chanting religious chants out loudly, and slowly, very slowly, everything became normal again, and eventually I sat up in bed, and I just wondered what the heck had happened. After some time, I went back to sleep and nothing else happened that night. After my wife came back, we shifted to a new rental house, and since then I haven't experienced anything similar again, which is a bit strange, right? Around 3 months ago, my younger brother woke up screaming bloody murder at around 4 a.m. in the morning, waking up the entire house. After my mother and I came running to see what was happening, he was downstairs crying and screaming that there was a man in his room. After calming him down, he told us the full story. At first, he was dreaming about hands coming from the curtains and reaching out to grab him. After waking up, the hands were still there apparently, but now they were around him on the bed. He shot out of bed screaming, only to be met by a dark figure lurking in the corner of his bedroom. He ran out of his room, down the stairs, and saw my mother standing there. Only my mother and I were just coming out of our rooms to see what all the screaming was about, so that wasn't our mother. My mother and I never saw the figures, only heard the screaming, but my brother swears that they were real and he wasn't dreaming anymore. He did see the real us coming down the stairs, and when he looked back, my mother was gone. He describes it as the scariest thing that he's ever been involved in. Now, about a week ago, a similar thing happened once again, and there were screams. Not as severe as the first time, but still loud enough to wake all of us up. My brother, he was in the hallway crying again. He had seen my deceased dog on her hind legs, with red eyes and a satanic symbol staring at him. I'm not entirely sure if this was a nightmare this time, but my brother is not someone who is easily scared or panicked, so it definitely leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. My first instincts say that it was just dreams and maybe sleep paralysis. I'm not too familiar with paranormal things, so I was hoping to maybe get some pointers here as to what this could be. I'd be lying if I said that I've never felt weird in our house, but I never thought much about it, I guess. It's just an ordinary Dutch family house with no prior history of paranormal activity. I'll try and answer any questions below in the comments section, since I don't really know what other info you might need to help, but I'm happy to provide whatever you need. This is an old story from when I used to live in the dorms during my time in college. This happened about 5 years ago, and this dorm has a full history of, people ending their lives and all sorts of tragic events. So much so that the dorm windows are only allowed to be open a little bit. So, I lived in a huge apartment in New York City with 3 big rooms. 3 in one, 3 in the second, and 2 in the third, my room. The rooms were really far apart, and there were 2 bathrooms too. One nice one, and the other bathroom with showers was a bit like a jail, to be honest. But that was my bathroom. So I lived there with a girl that we called T. Every night, T and I would have long conversations until the early morning. She was a bit insane, and so was I at the time. I was 19 years old, and I was going through depression and mental issues. So that already makes the whole story a bit dark, I know, but during the times we all lived there, here are some things that I personally encountered and some that were confirmed by others as well. The first thing was that lights were turning on and off by themselves all the time. One night I left the shower and I was the only one awake. I turned off the light, and immediately as I walked out, I saw that the light came right back on. It gave me shivers, but I didn't suspect anything until the next few encounters. And so the second thing that would happen was the smell of sulfur appearing for like 2 minutes and disappearing just as fast as it came. T and I, we were in the bedroom with the door locked and shut, no windows open, only the air conditioner. I asked my roommate if she had farted, and she said no, did you? And as soon as we stopped talking about it, it left with no trace, but the smell was just terrible. Way too strong to be from a person, really. The third thing was hearing long melodic whistling while I shower. It was not a drain too, because I'd been living there for like 2 months and never heard a noise like that. It was melodic and even had a tune. I am a very spiritual person, so this didn't scare me that much, but I definitely felt uncomfortable, so I left the shower in the end. And the fourth thing were entire objects falling off of a bolted desk that they gave you in the dorms. So one evening, my roommate and I were out of the bedroom. T was in the kitchen and I was in the bathroom, and we both heard a loud bang. When we walked in, everything on our desks was on the floor. But we had those tiered desks where there's a base level and shelves above it. T's desk was against the wall of the outside of the building, and mine shared a wall with the other room. I asked the other girls if they were moving around, and they were literally just there, sort of studying and relaxing. And they said no, and also none of their stuff was moved. It wasn't just like a few things fell off too. I mean, every single thing was now on the floor, almost like something or someone just swiped everything off to one side. A normal bang would probably cause just a few items to fall off, right? But not everything. I got uncomfortable with these experiences, so I decided to place my solid gold crucifix charm with a depiction of Jesus in the room. I also started praying at night, and weirdly enough, nothing ever happened after that. But man, I feel bad for anyone who stays in that room in the future because it is genuinely terrifying. So my husband took me to the Stanley Hotel for my birthday. We stayed only one night, and when we got there, we joined this ghost tour that they had going on, and they talked about the history of the hotel and whatnot. I leave during the tour to go to the bathroom, come back, and the tour is pretty much done. No biggie though, right? Fast forward to the crack of dawn, and I'm the lightest sleeper on earth pretty much. And I hear this loud scratching at our door, and am immediately wide awake. It stops after about 20 seconds, and I lay back down. And a few seconds later, the scratching starts again. I sit up in bed at this point and was weirded out because to get to our room you had to go through this corridor where our room was, and furthermore, you had to have a key pass to get through the first door, so it wasn't like you could just walk up to our door or anything, and there was nothing outside our door when we went to bed. The scratching though was loud and sounded like claws on a door, and you could tell it was coming from the bottom part of the door. I woke up my husband finally and asked, "Can you hear that scratching at the door?" But the scratching stopped the second that he woke up. he thought that I was crazy and laughed. He said that it was probably people outside, and I said no, it was coming from the door. I was adamant that it was the door too, because I got close enough to confirm it. I could hear it as clearly as I could hear him. He said that I was just looking for a reason to be scared by a ghost, so I must have imagined it. I was getting annoyed because I never mentioned anything about a ghost. All I said is that there was a loud scratching at the door and was wondering what it could possibly be because, we're in a corridor and it sure as heck wasn't people outside of our door. I was dumbfounded and irritated because I had no clue what it was and it was bothering me. What the heck was that, right? I didn't imagine it. So we went to check it out, and I asked the worker what could possibly be scratching at my door that early in the morning. His eyes got big all of a sudden, though, and he went and got another worker who worked there for a long time. I told him everything, and he said that it was a ghost dog that used to wake people up at the crack of dawn by scratching at their door. My husband chimes in at that point and says, "Oh yeah, you were in the bathroom when the guy was talking about the ghost dog." I could have choked him out, honestly, but anyway, I don't know what it was in the end. I didn't see anything, but I sure as heck heard it. And I had to get all of this off my chest because it's been bothering me ever since it happened. My husband, he still thinks I imagined it, but I know for sure that I didn't. "50 years ago, when I was in high school and college, I taught CPR and first aid classes for the Red Cross in a building that was built in the mid-1800s. I don't know architecture, but I think it would have been called Victorian, I guess. Most of the time, the classes I taught, they were like 10 to 15 people and ended at around 10 at night. After class, I'd watch everybody leave, lock up, and then clean up. Classes were on the second floor, and I'd have to carry the CPR dummies down to the basement for the storage. Creaky stairs, bad lighting, and shelves with stacked up CPR dummies looking like corpses. Yeah, it was a bit creepy. In fact, that basement was just overall creepy as heck. Always felt like you were being watched down there. I'd hear footsteps following me up the stairs and constantly check over my shoulder. While I was in the basement, almost always, I'd hear footsteps upstairs as well. The first time or two times I rushed upstairs to see who I'd forgotten and locked inside, but there was never anyone there, just me in the building. The office staff in the building left at 5, so I almost never saw them, but I decided to get there early to see if the office ladies knew anything about the creepy basement and footsteps. They all laughed at me. They apparently all knew that it was haunted. They even had names for the ghosts. There was a little girl that they'd seen and hear singing. There were muffled and mumbled voices, footsteps, and the toilets flushed on their own. But none of them, and not one of them, would ever go into the basement. Never the basement, they said. Apparently, the Red Cross, they had bought the building from a former funeral home, and the basement was where they did the embalming. I eventually got used to it, I suppose, but the first few times as a 17-year-old, that place absolutely terrified me. I've had many paranormal encounters in my life, whether it be seeing things, hearing things, or even feeling things. My family, they joke that I must have ghosts following me around because it happens so frequently. But we also lived in many haunted places growing up. Crying babies at night, things running around like crazy at 3 a.m, angry banging on the walls when nobody was home but me, and once, even a really tall shadow man that would sit by my bedroom doorway in a meditative pose. But you get the idea. Paranormal stuff gets on my nerves, in fact. So when I recently moved into a new apartment with my boyfriend, and I was very happy that it felt empty, as in no one was there but us, I was pretty chuffed. But unfortunately, that only lasted until last weekend. So, it was very late and we had just finished the deed. Yes, necessary backstory, sorry about that, but we were laying in bed. My boyfriend noticed the time, a little after 3 a.m, and jokingly asked if I could feel anything lurking around because it was the witching hour. I joked back that sorry, the ghosts only had a 10-minute window from 3 to 3:10 to do their haunting, and they'd missed their shot tonight. But only a few seconds later, our partly open bedroom door slammed shut violently. My poor boyfriend, who also had very negative experiences with the paranormal and is honestly more scared of these things than me, was very freaked out. So to relieve some of the tension, I joked that there was nothing to worry about, since it was probably some cranky old man's ghost who was mad that we didn't do just 5 minutes of dry missionary and call it good, and that it probably took him 5 years of stored energy to slam the door like that anyway. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I felt something slam over me, like a shield of air but solid, and for a few seconds I couldn't breathe. That sobered me up quickly and got me properly scared. I very softly whispered to my boyfriend that whatever it was did not appreciate my sense of humor. For the next few minutes, the bedroom door kept opening and shutting in small jerky movements. Eventually I gathered my courage, got up, opened the door and apologized for being offensive. I then firmly added that we were trying to sleep now, shut the door and locked it. And we slept the rest of the night unharassed. Honestly, I think the funniest part was my boyfriend asking to move to the side that I usually sleep on by the wall, so I would be closer to the door, which was absolutely fine by me. It was definitely one of the more interesting encounters though that I've had in a while, and I'm sad to say that this house is not empty after all. I'm even sadder to report, whatever or whoever is here, they do not have a sense of humor at all. But I mean, oh well, after the shadow meditation man, whose head nearly touched the doorframe while sitting, this ghost, honestly, is just low-hanging fruit to me. To preface this, I just want to say that me and my wife are both of sound body and mind. We're both military retirees living aboard Camp Pendleton. So last night, my wife was in the garage around midnight painting her toenails. I was upstairs watching X-Men 97. Both of our dogs were with her in the garage. She had her headphones on, but heard the dogs growling and hair standing up on their backs. The garage door was all the way up, and she looks up to see what they were growling at. It's super dark on base at night, and off in a distance, maybe 100 or so feet, she says that she sees two bright white circle lights, kind of stacked up atop of one another. One smaller, one a little bit bigger. She says that when she looked up, the lights were initially by a tree, and then floated to the center of the field, and seemingly began coming towards our house. She says that she hurriedly grabbed the dogs and let the garage door down. She's an East Texas, rough and rugged sort of gal, and not easily scared by much. She said that it wasn't a person and that it was just two balls of light floating there. She's not into UFOs or aliens in a big way. She does believe that they exist though. She's just not into researching and seeking info out on them. And honestly, I'm pretty mad because she didn't tell me anything till the morning. She was like, dude, I forgot to tell you, last night this happened. I was low-key sort of heated because I research this stuff a lot and I enjoy it. But what do you guys think she actually saw? Was it just balls of lightning that we hear about all the time as one possible answer for this? Or was there something more to it? This happened last year, right before I switched up jobs in October. So I used to work really early in the morning. In fact, I would be at a transit bus at 4:30, get to my intersection, and hopefully catch a connecting bus. I didn't like walking in this neighborhood for two reasons as well. One, I was almost hit by a drunk driver one time while walking to work. And 2, I have a lot of body pain that made walking distances a little bit difficult. My bus, though, was running late, so sadly I did miss my connection and was forced to walk that day. So I began my 15-minute walk to my job in the dark of the morning. Now, this neighborhood is a bit strange. One of those where you simply cross a street and you're in the other good or bad side of the neighborhood, if you catch my drift. And I was in what was the newer or good side of this area. To add into this too, the area is barely lit with hardly any streetlights, so it was an anxiety-inducing walk, that much is for sure. But as I'm walking, I see headlights down one of the darkened streets. It catches my attention and I glance down it for a split second just to see what it was doing, and then I focus back on the path ahead of me. Suddenly, though, the car is peeling out of that street and does a sharp turn to pull up right next to me. In the car were 3 or 4 guys. I want to say that they were early to mid-20s, but it was hard to tell, but I immediately went on high alert. When they got up beside me, they started screaming at me about how they were going to kill me and a bunch of other stuff before they eventually made a U-turn on the road and peeled off into the opposite direction. My heart was absolutely racing and I was shaking. It was the second time something bad had happened in that neighborhood that put me off that I couldn't wait to get a new job away from this area. While their threats were empty and probably just a bunch of dudes being idiots, it didn't take away the fact that for a split second, I was genuinely afraid that they were going to mow me down with their car or jump out and beat the ever-living, well, you get it. And it only added fuel to the growing PTSD fire of almost getting rammed by a drunk driver one time. Luckily, I did get a new job within a month of the incident, but I am still very nervous around traffic. And every time a car speeds by me while I'm walking on the sidewalk, I feel my heart racing because I think of that time, and also the drunk driver. So I'm not big on the paranormal by any means. In fact, I don't really even believe in this stuff for years. I've always thought that this kind of stuff was just total and utter nonsense, really. But for the last year, I have been experiencing some of the weirdest stuff, and genuinely, I cannot explain any of it. I live in a relatively small house, 1,100 square feet, 2 bedrooms, only an attic, no upstairs, attached garage, and the house we lived in was built in the 50s. My family have lived in this house for about 5 years now. We love this house too, and for the first 4 years, we had none of these issues. This all started in about August of last year. I'm going to give you a bit of a list of events here that I now suspect are all related. So the first event was while I was backing into my driveway one day, while switching cars so my wife could leave for work, I saw what looked like a shadowy man on the backup camera enter my house. My heart raced, but I flew into my house, grabbed the bat, and checked every room top to bottom because I was certain I saw someone break in. And in the end, I found nobody. The second event was in September. We started hearing weird sounds, like knocking in the walls. I thought maybe we had mice, but no. The knocking never lasted long, it always was just 3 knocks. Sometimes we would hear it on the doors and on the windows, but that was it. The third event was in November, and I started hearing the sounds of like our old switches in the other rooms flipping on and off. It would only happen like one time, but it's always on and immediately off. This would mainly be in the kitchen. Sometimes I heard it in the bathroom though, but might I add that I never see the lights go on, but I clearly hear the switches going on and off. The fourth event, and this is when it got really weird. This happened in December one night at exactly 10:30 p.m. while listening to YouTube in the garage and working on my motorcycle. I heard something like slide and fall in the living room. Everybody in my house was asleep, so I head to the living room to see where it was. Now, in order to get into the living room from the garage, you have to go through the kitchen, and when I got to the microwave stand, I heard clear as day my voice calling my son's name. It only did it once, but I flew into the living room with my fist cocked, but saw nothing. But when I looked around the living room, one of the pictures above my couch, it had fallen down, and it was the one of my son. Now, the fifth event, we hear stomping between our rooms and my son's room. It sounds like it's pacing between our rooms, and it is a short hallway, maybe like 18 feet. It never lasts long, but it's weird. The sixth event, random toys are making noise now. We're still hearing the footsteps too, but they're not stamps or stomps anymore. More like sprinting, in fact. Like something is sprinting back and forth in the hallway, and always just the hallways. Weirdly, all of this stopped in February, until today when we started hearing weird knocks again, and now both me and my wife have the weird feeling that we're being watched. In fact, my arm hair has been standing up on its own for no reason. It's really weird to me, and I don't know what to do. And that's it. Nothing too crazy, I guess, but it's just all really weird stuff that I really cannot explain. Again, I don't know what this is or how to explain it, but if you guys have any ideas of how to make any of this stop, then I am genuinely all ears. So something has been bugging me as of late. I've experienced a lot of events of the paranormal throughout my life, but I've had a hard time trying to share experiences with people, mostly because I live in the South, I think. The problem with these creatures or things like ghosts is that it's hard to explain an experience without seeming like a crazy fool. However, I feel that it is time to share, and I want to connect to people who have had similar experiences with the unknown. I'll tell you now, though, that even with a large track number of running into these things, I am still heavily skeptical on what these are, and I always lean to try to disprove them. So, a few years ago, I decided to head out to the country to meet my friend. His name was Brandon. Brandon was a college buddy of mine who had quit college and had become a welder. He made some good cash at an early age, and had a house built on his family's land too, which he wanted to show off to me during a nice sunny day. I won't lie too, I loved his place. His family owned a huge patch of acres, and his place was built like the ultimate man cave. And anyway, after arriving, me and my old friend did the usual catching up and playing a few games on the PS4. Everything was normal until Brandon went out to get some beers and some pizza. He had left me alone to play some Mortal Kombat on his 75-inch 4K TV. It was normal for about 15 minutes of his departure until I heard running downstairs. I decided to look down the stairs to see what was happening, and I saw a little girl with frizzy black hair run past the bottom of the stairs, with Brandon's dog sitting at the middle of the stairs watching her run past too. I was like, cool. Brandon's kid's sister walked from his parents to his place to play or something. Honestly, I didn't think too much of it, as I had seen kids outside of his place playing outside before. Brandon returned with some domino pizzas, some wings and some beer, and I decided to tell him what I saw, that his kid's sister was running on the first floor. And the guy, he looked at me spooked. He said that he didn't have a kid sister and that the kids, they had left as soon as I pulled up. The weird part was that he got kind of excited and said, "Dude, you saw her too?" I had to make him explain. So Brandon told me a story that happened 3 weeks prior to me coming. He had some guys over drinking during the night, and they decided to crash in the room that we were in. As they slept on the floor, one of the guys started screaming, which prompted them all to roll over to see what was going on. And he said that there was this girl with black hair standing at the base of the stairs staring at them in the dark, and as soon as they saw her, she darted downstairs again. He stated that they turned the lights on and searched the place for her, all over the place, but she was nowhere to be seen. He was happy that I saw her because this means that to him, it was real. When I analyzed the event myself, I noticed that there wasn't a back door to the house that he built, and when the girl appeared, there was a lot of dust that sort of looked like smoke as she ran past the stairs. Usually ghosts or entities, they always seem to be made of this sort of smoke that has properties of like mist or something. Strangely though, she seemed so solid and full of saturation when she ran past. But what really made me think was noticing that the dog seemed so confused when he saw it too. This was honestly such a strange event. Also, they didn't live in a neighborhood or anything, so there were no neighbors. This whole event is still such a mystery to me, and I wish I had more answers. I'm a male, 27 years old now, that was born in Italy. A pretty standard family, I guess. Just an older sister of 3 years, and except for arguments between our parents, things have always been pretty normal. These arguments never escalated into violence, fortunately, but there was a lot of verbal abuse, so both of us always wanted to get out as soon as we could. Why am I mentioning this? Because it's part of the reason, as you'll see soon, why both of us spent so much time outside. Also because I want to clarify that my sister and I have always been polar opposite regarding the paranormal. She's always been fascinated by it, always interested, and she would have liked to have had some experiences regarding it. Me? Heck no. I've pretty much always been the opposite. Give me serial killers, crazy people, or whatever, and I'm fine with it. But paranormal things? I never wanted to have anything to do with it. Well, I guess joke's on me, because weird things always happen to me and never to her. So, here's some of the things that happened. The first experience, I spent a lot of time inside my cousin's house when I was younger, specifically around 12 to 13 years old, up to about 18 years old. I slept there a lot of times, even for weeks in fact, mainly because, as I said before, I didn't want to stay at my house as much as possible, didn't want to be there to hear the arguments. His house is more like a villa, I guess. There's this sort of big lake at the center of the property, and all the territory around it is part of the property as well. Walking in a circle around it at a slow pace will take you around maybe an hour if you don't explore, and just follow the trail, and historically this was an ancient Roman port before the landscape was changed. In other words, it's extremely close to the sea. The house itself was about 2 floors, and from when we were 12 to 13 years old, up until 16, we would always sleep together in one room. It didn't matter if we had to bring out a bunk bed, we just feared sleeping far away from each other since the house was big and in the middle of nowhere. I hadn't had any experiences yet, but we just felt like that. But then, stuff started happening, but only ever to me. The first time it happened was when I was about 13 years old. We were all sleeping in the same room, and it was the 4 of us. Me, my younger cousin, my older cousin, and my aunt. It was in the middle of the night, and that night all of us went to bed as usual. Nothing weird happened before. None of us felt any way in particular. In other words, it was a pretty standard night, really. I was sleeping peacefully. Then, without a reason or a rhyme, I just sort of woke up. I sort of sat down in my bed, and in front of me, there was this thing. I say thing because it didn't really have a proper form. The best way that I can describe it was as if some had covered themselves in a white blanket, and that you could sort of see were only the superficial features of it. And I knew it was female. The outlines were feminine, and for some reason I just knew it. Now, usually I am a very analytical and a rational person, so against any kind of instinct, I just sort of sat there without panicking, and I started rationalizing, I guess you could say. Thinking about it now, I really wanted to scream and call myself an idiot, but whatever. I looked at it, and This thing looked at me, I guess, and my first thought was, oh, maybe it's just a blanket on the chair in front of me or something. I looked down on my bed, but no. I was using the blanket because it was winter and it was cold. Then, without even raising my eyes, I thought, then maybe it's the dog? Because they had several dogs, and one of them was a French bulldog with this white spot on its back, so maybe he was just sleeping on the chair in front of me, and that was the reason for what I was seeing. I turned around, and the dog was sleeping on the bed next to me on my cousin's legs. I turned around once more, and that thing was still there. It hadn't moved an inch. I just sort of stared at it, in the end shrugged my shoulders, not having an explanation, and just lied back in bed, going back to sleep. It sounds crazy, but the morning after when I realized what had happened, I was almost freaking out, asking myself why the heck I reacted like that. But in that precise moment, I didn't feel in danger, nor any kind of bad sensation. It was peaceful, and it felt like it didn't matter. Which is weird to say, I know, because normally you would just get up and get the heck out of there, or at least tell someone, right? That's what I think now. But that's what I did. I just laid back down and went back to sleep. If anyone's wondering too, at which time of the night it was that I woke up, it was 3 a.m. I know this because in front of me there was a TV with the decoder below it, which would always show the current time, so I could clearly see it when this happened. Now, the second experience, always with my cousins, but this time it was late afternoon and always in winter. It was around the end of January. It was me, my older cousin, our uncle, and my aunt. This time I was 14 years old. We were just taking a walk around the lake, and there was a still light. It was around 5 p.m. Everything was pretty normal up to that point. My cousin and I were walking in front of the adults. Not too far, but just a few meters, and we could still clearly talk between the 4 of us without yelling, and that's what we were doing, just talking casually and enjoying the stroll. At a certain point, we reached an old bridge made out of stone. It's always been there, and you need to cross it if you want to continue walking, since the water from the lake passes below it. We started crossing, not walking fast at all, when suddenly, both my cousin and I started hearing a voice, a female voice. It wasn't a bad voice, I guess. The tone of it was very light, as if a whisper in the wind, but the point is that this whisper was repeated several times, and this whisper was also calling our names, both of us. It lasted around maybe 10 seconds, and both of us could hear it as if the voice was moving from sort of left to right in front of us, as if someone was walking away, and thus the voice was getting further and further away. Both of us, of course, looked back behind us at first, thinking that the adults were pranking us, but while we were still hearing the voice, they were just sort of casually talking between each other. So we turned around, stick next to each other, and kept walking without saying anything because, what are we going to say? When we almost reached the end of the bridge, the voice disappeared. Let's say around 5 seconds passed from the moment it stopped calling our names. My cousin's mother called us from behind, and she asked us why we didn't stop the old man in front of us. The point is that there was no old man. She said that he just walked right in front of us from the left to the right, dressed in some weird clothes as if from another time. And when she told us that, we sprinted immediately, running past the end of the bridge to see if we could see anyone. But of course, there wasn't anybody, and no footprints left either. Now, imagine this. At the bridge there is a sort of grass in front of you and the trail that keeps going on. On the right side you just fall directly into the lake, and on the left side there is a bit more land, except for the fact that there is a stone wall going all around the property. It's tall too, around 8 to 9 meters. And as if this isn't enough as well, the wall is covered in bushes and branches, making it impossible to approach it without making an absolute ruckus. In other words, how this guy disappeared like that, we still have no idea. We told them about the voice after this, which they didn't hear, and apparently they saw this old man, which we didn't see. After it, we just finished our stroll, and I guess we just never really talked about it again. The third thing that happened, and this was a bad idea, and we were stupid teenagers, I know, but it was Halloween night and I was 16 years old. Again, same property, same cousin, same place, well, sort of anyway. Lately, all of us had started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and we started like role-playing games and all that. And we decided that for the Halloween night, we wanted to do something scary. So we decided to go to this old rural building inside the property. We called it the Towers because in medieval times, it was a small building with 2 towers, one on each side. In that moment, it was being renovated, but since it was night and there was no one working there, and due to the fact that it was inside their own property, it was kind of okay to just barge into it as long as we didn't cause any damage. So we brought our Book of Vampire the Masquerade, a few things with us to set up the mood since we decided that we were going to play it inside the building, and that was it. It was again my older cousin, my younger cousin, a friend of ours, and me. We set out around 9 p.m, so of course it was already dark, and when we reached the place by walking it, it was already 11. Now, to give you an idea of this building, the ground floor was already covered in concrete, so it was full of dust and gravel. There were no doors or windows yet, just openings covered in the classic green net that the workers put on in order to cover and not let people see through them and all that. Below the ground floor was the basement. It was big and much like the ground floor. We didn't go there because it's pitch black dark down there, no light, water high to your ankles, and honestly it was pretty scary looking as well. We knew that it was simply the place where the workers were working on the old foundations, but still, we didn't want to go down there. Then, there was the tower still left standing on the right side. The one on the left at the time was already demolished. At this point, we decided to split up. My cousin started walking the stairs to go up, while this friend of ours and me decided to stay there waiting for them. And this is when things started going wrong. At first, we heard something falling from the tower down below, and of course, at first we sort of thought that it was because my cousins were trying to play a prank on us, so we just decided to laugh and shrug it off. Then we noticed a shadowy black figure running outside the building. How did we notice? Because the green nets to block vision were not in a good condition, so we could see pretty much the outside, and also because we had torches pointing in that direction. Whatever it was, it had no shape whatsoever, just a sort of shadowy human figure, or humanoid I guess, not that tall, that passed really quickly in front of us in the outside. We obviously started to worry about this, but still, we were trying to be brave and laugh it off. Again though, something fell from the tower and we started shouting at my cousins to stop, that they were not being funny. Right after we did this, the most crazy thing happened. Dust started raising around us, and footprints started appearing on the ground, as if someone was running in a circle around us. But we couldn't see anybody. There was absolutely nobody there, and yet we could clearly see this happening in front of our eyes. After that, we just ran the heck out of there, scared half to death, looking around and waiting for my cousins to come back as well. We just had to wait like 5 minutes and they came back. Well, we of course sweared at them, saying that we knew that it was them that were throwing stuff from the top of the tower, and they laughed it off, admitting that they indeed threw down a brick. But they looked at us in genuine confusion when we told them about the second thing that they threw off. They had no idea whatsoever, and they told us more and more times that they didn't do it. Also because when they came back down, there was nothing else different except from the brick that they threw down the tower. After this, we bolted out and we decided that we were just going to watch a movie at home that night. And that was it. The rest of the night was pretty peaceful. There are also some other things that happened too. Like one time I dreamt 1 year in advance of my aunt having a kid, including name, sex, and in which day he or she would be born. Another time I dreamt about the same thing in advance, around 1 year and some months more, this time for another aunt of mine. Again, name and sex and in which day he or she would be born. I got everything right as well, both times. Another time I was woke up at 3 p.m. in the house of my parents, with no reason whatsoever, just a sort of terrible sensation, and my first thought was, I need to call my cousins. No explanation whatsoever, just that sort of terrible feeling and sudden thought of it. Of course, I calmed down and went back to sleep because, what the heck, right? Who calls people at like 3 in the morning because of a gut feeling? Well, short story. The morning after, my mother barged into my room saying that something happened, and apparently, lightning struck my cousin's kitchen, starting a fire, and almost hit the gas canister. And at which time did it happen? 3:30 in the morning. Luckily, the younger one was awake because he was going to the bathroom, noticed the fire and woke up everyone, so nothing bad happened. Still, I still tell myself today that if I ever feel something like that again, then next time I'm just going to make the call. Since I stopped meditating and doing this kind of stuff, these kind of dreams and experiences have died down a lot. I don't know if it's connected or whatever, but just in case, I decided to stop. During the summer of 2008, I stayed with an aunt and uncle for a few months because I wasn't getting along with my parents. Another story for another day, that one. But while staying there, I worked overnights at a local convenience store. During the day, I was mostly alone while my aunt and uncle worked. At this point in my life, I had not experienced anything paranormal and didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or the afterlife. I was 19 and I knew everything after all. However, as soon as I moved in, I was faced with experiences that honestly changed my perspective forever. The first one, I was alone. It was about 9 a.m. and I had just finished my shift, and I was preparing to wind down and get ready for bed. I was alone as usual. Both my aunt and uncle were working, so I had the house to myself. I was sitting in the downstairs living room just eating, when, out of seemingly nowhere, I heard what sounded like an adult running through the kitchen, which paralleled the living room and was completely out of view to me. A bang, and the footsteps went into the den that connected to the kitchen. I bolted up and went to the kitchen to investigate the sound. There was a coffee pot on the floor. That must have been the bang that I heard when it hit the floor. I headed towards the den to see who was in there, but when I did, it was empty. Now, there is no way for anyone to have been in the den and me not see them. I shrugged it off and figured that I was just tired, and in the end I just went to bed. A few weeks later, my alarm woke me up at 9 p.m. for work. I groggily got up and headed towards the bathroom that was directly across my room. However, the door was shut and I could see the light shining from under the door, and I heard the distinct sound of someone sweeping the floor, like that swish sound. It sounded like an old-fashioned straw broom. I found this very odd considering that no one besides myself used that bathroom, and I really couldn't think of why anyone would be sweeping it at 9 p.m. at night. But I patiently waited some time for whoever was in there to finish up. After a few minutes, I couldn't wait any longer because I had to start getting ready for work. I approached the bathroom door. I could still hear the sweeping, mind you, and I gently knocked and asked if they were almost done. But to my surprise, the sound abruptly stopped. I opened the door, and when I did, no one was there. I brushed this experience off as well and pushed it to the back of my mind, but I certainly was uneasy about that one. This last experience is the reason that I ended up moving out. It was too terrifying to ignore what I knew was happening in that house, and so it really was the last straw. So my sister stopped by during the day to see me, and her and I were in the back room just hanging out and chatting. The door to the hallway was closed. My aunt and uncle were working, so her and I were the only two people who were home. As we sort of gabbed away, we suddenly heard what sounded like 1920s music coming from downstairs. We froze and fell silent. The music grew louder and louder until it sounded like it was coming from every corner in the house. The music sounded like it was being played from a record player. My sister and I just sort of stared at one another, too terrified to speak now. Then we heard what sounded like a party erupting from downstairs. It sounded like 30 or more people were downstairs, in fact. Sounds of laughing, talking, and chinaware clinking filled the house. Then, what we heard next terrified me. Loud, heavy footsteps started making their way upstairs where my sister and I were. They were booming, and it was slow but purposeful. The party sounds and music had reached a deafening level, but I could still hear those heavy footsteps above all the other sounds. Eventually, I heard the footsteps make it to the second floor. Then they slowly started stomping towards the closed door my sister and I sat behind. When the footsteps reached our door, I leapt up and yanked the door open. And when I did, all the noise in the house suddenly stopped. The party, the music, the stomping. There was obviously no one behind the door either. The hallway was empty and the house was dead silent again. My sister and I wasted no time racing out of the house and staying outside until our aunt and uncle came home. They didn't believe our story, and I moved out shortly afterwards and never stepped foot in that house again. When I was in my early 20s, my friend and I were in my boyfriend's basement talking about the paranormal and discussing our views and experiences in that regard. There was a bedroom directly across from where we were sitting, and neither of us liked the vibes coming from that empty room, which is what started the conversation. After a few minutes, I felt something bump the back of the couch hard enough to make me bounce forward a little bit, and then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I didn't take it too seriously. I mean, maybe I was just imagining it, but she said that she felt it too. Whatever, I didn't believe her. But that's when I saw something absolutely horrific from the doorway of that room. I was absolutely certain that I imagined it, and wasn't going to say anything about it, but when she described the thing that I thought that I'd imagined, I was absolutely terrified. At the bottom of the doorway, a little being that I can only say looked a little like the head goblin from the movie Legend with Tom Cruise, except without the huge nose and had a scary face-wide grin full of sharp teeth and greasy-looking black ringlets of hair, sprang up diagonally from the near bottom of that dark doorway. It looked right at me, then it disappeared the same way that it appeared. I couldn't help the gasp that escaped me, but as I said, I was going to keep it to myself, so neither of us questioned my sanity, until she spoke up and said, "I saw it too." Now, I hadn't told her what I saw, anything at all, but she went on to describe everything that I'd just seen, and I sat there speechless and scared. It didn't take long after that to gather up our belongings and zip past that dark doorway and sprint up those stairs as quickly as we could. After which, we never went down there again. When I was 22 years old, second-year uni student, no drink, no drugs, living in the Stoke area of the UK, I rented an old middle terrace house in second year with my then girlfriend and also some friends. It was a creepy and dark house, as it only had windows at the front and back. It had a dingy and damp old basement with lots of old furniture stuffed inside of it, and a black cat would show up at the back door every night meowing, which I befriended and fed in the end. It was also creepy because of the dark and sort of muddy cul-de-sac that served as communal courtyard and car park as well. All of this didn't overly bother me, however, because I grew up in a pretty old house built in the early 1800s anyway. It did, as I later learned, bother my downstairs housemate and his girlfriend, who heard regular footfalls at night in the hallway and adjacent living room, only to find nobody when he'd sneak out to look. I also discovered a year after this event that students who lived there the year prior all believed the house was haunted and were glad to have moved out. So, on to my story. My term time ended 4 weeks after all the other tenants because I had to do clinical placement. This meant that I lived in this large house alone, which I actually really loved. I'm a bit of an introvert and love alone time anyway, so it suited me. It started great too. For 2 weeks I enjoyed it despite the background creepiness. I would just reason any creepiness away, as I still do now. However, after the 2-week mark, I became aware of a creeping sense of dread that I just couldn't rationalize or find cause for. I am not an overly anxious person by any means, and I enjoy my own company, and nothing weird had happened, so it was a bit odd. I began to feel very unwelcome and very much not alone in the house. I felt how a prey animal must feel when they feel eyes on their back. I began to feel so scared that even in the day I would take the 3-mile walk onto campus and sit and work in the library, if not on placement. I would come home and be afraid. I even devised a system for moving around the house at night without ever being in an unlit area. I also did this during the day in the windowless areas too. I had to move from my large comfy room into the smallest bedroom, lock the door and sleep with my back to a wall, often with the light on. I was just inexplicably afraid and I couldn't explain it. On the final day, I had to lock all the windows, turn off all plugs, get some stuff from the basement, and lock the back door before I left. I was utterly terrified and felt like I was moving in slow motion the entire time. I went around systematically ensuring a light was always on and that I wasn't in darkness. I had piled all my stuff, backpack and duffel bag. The rest was mercifully packed in my car the day before, at the front door. This is where things got really scary, and I still cannot explain what happened adequately. It was late afternoon and still light outside, but the house was dark. I steeled myself to turn the hallway light off, but the light switch was about 4 meters away from the front door at the foot of the stairs. It was night dark upstairs, normal because no windows and all the doors were shut. But I turned the light off and scurried away without turning my back to the stairs. The daylight still lit the hallway from the open front door, but as I got to the door, the strangest thing happened. My neck hair stood on end. To my shame, if I needed to pee at that time, I think I would have peed myself, but I could feel or see, I can't explain, a black and sort of viscous, shadowy cloud slowly making its way down the stairs towards me. I felt such malevolence. I basically tripped backwards into the street and into daylight, shut the door, and as soon as I did, everything felt fine, like nothing had just happened. I got up immediately and locked the door and posted the key through the letterbox and have never seen that house again. Now, the only way that I can explain the feeling is to liken it to a dementor and ring wraith attack, except there wasn't a caped humanoid figure chasing me. The fear and the dread was indescribable, and I have never since experienced anything like it. To be clear as well, I have and have never had any mental health issues. I was happy and not stressed at the time. I've never taken any drugs or anything, and I even feel crazy and sort of embarrassed relating this story, but if anyone else has had any other experience like this, then I would love to hear it, because it feels pretty lonely having experienced this and really having no one to talk to about it. So, I'm either going crazy or my apartment is actually haunted. At first, I thought that it was just dreams because my first week in the bedroom I heard a female yell with surprise, "What are you doing here?" The next thing that happened is things would go missing for weeks at a time and pop up again in places I'm sure that I checked. Then I started seeing shadows dart across the corner of my vision. This week she let out a scared scream at the foot of my bed, like a surprised gasp. I went back to bed and then this thing slapped the foot of my bed so hard that I felt the mattress dip next to my foot. I'll admit at this point that I was more angry than surprised anymore, so I told whatever it was to cut it out. Big mistake, because before I wasn't sure I was being haunted because it always happened late at night when I was almost asleep. But yesterday, she turned on this toy that I have. It's embarrassing, I know, but she turned it on, and I promise that this isn't satire or anything. I got up and turned it off and even put on the button facing the ceiling in case maybe the button got pressed somehow. But as soon as I sat back down, she turned it back on again, and at this point I must admit I was a little bit scared, so I turned it back off and tried to go back to bed. But it turned on again. I threw it away at 4 a.m. to the dumpster on the street. I then tried to go back to bed and I could hear breathing next to my bed. I then got this overwhelming feeling that I was being stared at until about 6 a.m. when I finally had to get up out of bed anyway. I know it's a she because I've heard her voice and it's always been scared like I shouldn't be here. I live in an army barracks and suicide is actually pretty common. My theory is some girl took her life in the room and she doesn't know that she's dead or something. I didn't believe in ghosts before coming here, but I've taken talking to her gently before I do things. I'll tell her that I'm about to turn on some music or that she has the place to herself when I leave for work. I'm honestly hoping that she just thinks that I'm her roommate or something because obviously this was her space and she isn't tracking that she's dead or something. She has never been violent or aggressive with me, but she has a habit of doing these things at the dead of night and terrifying me. I need advice as to what to do with this because she is very real and she made a believer out of me, but I would be lying if I said that she doesn't scare me. This happened when my best friend was 17 and a half and I was 17 in 1996. My best friend Chrissy and I are both smaller females. She's 5'4" and at the time weighed 110 pounds, but was a soccer player, very athletic and strong. I am 5'7", and at the time I weighed about 125 pounds. We are both blue-eyed blondes and were often asked if we were sisters or cousins. Now, there's a large reservoir on the outskirts of her town surrounded by a beautiful public park. We figured that we'd be fine to walk around in the park because lots of people go hiking there after all. I had gotten some really good quality weed and we were looking forward to finding a peaceful place to smoke some out in nature. I had my pipe ready in my pocket and we were pretty stoked. We chose to go out on a Saturday. It was a beautiful sunny day and there were not many people there either. We parked her car by the reservoir in the mostly vacant lot that had 2 other cars in it. We didn't see anybody when we got there either. We walked around the water for a bit and then chose a trail to go up. It was about 80 degrees out and we were sweating, but we had some water in my small day pack. As we got about a quarter mile or so into the trail, I started having a bit of a weird feeling. I looked at her and quietly asked, "Hey, do you feel like something is off here? Everything's really quiet." Where there were usually crickets chirping and frogs singing, it was absolutely silent. She looked at me and said, "Yeah, I think so." And then we heard some crackling of leaves about 60 feet behind us and a bit to the left. We didn't see anybody at the time, so we continued forward. We were getting pretty nervous and we both heard the crackling again, this time a little bit closer. We still did not see anyone though. Each time we would continue forward, we would hear footsteps a little bit more behind us, and at this point, I thought that we were being stalked. There was a turn off to the left which led to a clearing by a large rock about maybe 12 feet high with a large sturdy rope anchored on it to climb up to the top. It was a part of a steep hillside off the cliff and the rope to climb it was anchored to the ground as well, so no one could really move it or anything. so I told her, "We need to get up to that rock now and we need high ground." She nodded and went up first with me right behind her. We flew up that rock, clinging to the rope tightly and going as fast as we could. When we reached the top, we turned around to see an older man, probably about 45, with a slighter build, wearing a jacket, jeans, and glasses, coming into the clearing. He was about 20 feet away, and he looked at us with a cold, vacant expression that I'll never forget. I got goosebumps looking at him, and I shouted, "Hi, will you please leave us alone? We're trying to have some privacy here." He made no response, and with a blank expression slowly started walking towards the rope which led to the top of the rock. My friend at this point was really scared and asked, "What do we do?" I saw a large rock about 8 foot and almost square to my right, so I grabbed it. I was surprised at how heavy it was, but my adrenaline was going, so I lifted it pretty easily. I told her, "Look around for the biggest rocks you can find, quickly. Move them next to us. Hold the biggest one. If that guy tries to come up, we throw them at him and hit him as hard as we can. Aim for his head." Fortunately, there was a pile of sort of sizable rocks behind us to the left, like someone had made a ring to hold a fire on the top of the rock there and then move them away or whatever. She brought a few over and held a large one herself. My friend and I stood close to the edge of the rock, holding our makeshift weapons. I looked down to the base of the rock where the guy was considering the rope. He looked up at us again with very cold blue eyes and no expression. Then he reached his hand for the rope. I shouted loudly, "Do not come up here. If you try to come up here, you're going to get really hurt. We're aiming for your head with these rocks, so get away from us." I held the rock close to my chest so that he could see it. My friend was next to me doing the same thing, and we had a pile of more rocks as well. He blinked his eyes and cocked his head a little bit, then released his hand from the rope and silently backed away. He backed to the edge of the clearing, backed through the brush, still watching us and walking backwards. And then we heard his crunching footsteps go back through the woods until we couldn't hear him anymore. We stayed on the rock for about another 20 minutes, maybe a bit more, watching and waiting. There was no other way to access the rock, except for the steep hillside covered with poison oak, so we didn't think that he'd try it. And plus, we'd be able to hear him if he did anyway. After we didn't hear anything for like 20 minutes, we decided to make a break for her car. We threw several rocks down the road and mine hit the dirt with a particularly satisfying thud. Chrissy went first down while I was watching, just in case he came back. When I was scaling down the rock, she was holding a rock, getting ready to throw it full force if he returned. Fortunately, he didn't. We each grabbed the largest rock that we could carry, put a few smaller ones in our pockets for good measure, and then we headed back to her car on the trail, very carefully and quietly. The crickets were chirping again, so we felt that he had left, but we were still extremely cautious. We did make it back to her car with that incident, and we quickly left. And that was the last time that I've ever hiked in that park. So about 3 years ago, I was living with my mum for about a year after a relationship breakdown with an ex. I hadn't had anything like this happen to me before, but I have had quite a few paranormal experiences. Some backstory first. So, since the age of about 10, I used to see what I would call a woman periodically throughout my childhood and into my teens. I would always see her out of the corner of my eye, peering around walls or door frames, and she would always just watch me. When I was younger, it used to freak me out, but I spoke to my mum about it, and she said that it's probably just someone watching over me, so that's what I believed for a very, very long time. Especially as this woman had never made me feel truly scared, threatened, or done anything besides poke its head around a corner and just sort of watch me. No one else ever saw her, and as soon as I'd turn my head to try and see her, she would always disappear. I'd turn away again, and sure enough, a head would reappear out of the corner of my eye again. This happened over the course of about 12 years with no real routine. Sometimes I would see her twice in a week. Then I would see her for 6 months. Then I'd see her like maybe once in a month, and then not for a year or so. I don't really remember, but it was always the same. Just watching, I guess. It's worth noting too that this happened in multiple houses and places where I've lived. Anyway, flash forward to 2021, height of the pandemic, and I'd split up from my then girlfriend and moved back to my mum's for about a year. I don't remember how long I'd been there at that time that this happened, but it sure as heck made me get my own place a lot quicker. So, like most people, I tend to sleep on my front with one arm under my pillow, one leg bent up, as this has always been more comfortable for me. I've never slept on my back at all, and I've never woken up sleeping on my back either, always on my front side. Anyway, one night I go to sleep as normal. I put a YouTube video on in the background, lights off, sleeping on my front. My bedroom door was always shut for privacy when suddenly I just wake up. Instantly too, I can tell that something is wrong because I'm laying on my back, half propped up on my pillows, almost as if I'd fallen asleep reading a book or on my phone or something. My arms were at my side, and the first thing that I saw was my bedroom door was wide open. Now, the layout of the house was sort of split into two. You would walk in the front door and either turn left or right. To the left immediately was the living room with a connecting hallway leading to my mum's bedroom. To the right would have the bathroom directly in front of you, kitchen on the right, and my bedroom directly opposite the kitchen on the left. My bed faced the doorway and allowed me to see into the hallway and kitchen when fully open. We lived in a block of flats, apartments for my American friends, so there was a bit of light coming through the frosted glass in the front door from the communal stairwell, which slightly illuminated the hallway and the kitchen. Now, as I've just woken up and I'm already confused as to why I'm awake and why my bedroom door is open, as my eyes adjust, which only took a few seconds given the light, I could see a figure standing in my doorway with its back to the kitchen. Now, as soon as I looked at it, it moved to the right, as if heading towards the front door in the living room. Immediately, I started to feel my heart rate rise because did I really just see something? As I'm sat there processing everything that's happening, and the off feeling that I had, this thing slowly comes back into view and is just standing directly in my doorway watching me. Now, I don't know how I knew, but my brain instantly made the connection to what I'd seen growing up, and I knew that this was the same thing that I'd seen watching me when I was younger. Except now, I felt scared. I felt threatened. I couldn't focus on what the body of this woman or thing looked like because all I could focus on was the dark yellow eyes that it had. Now, given that it was dark and I usually wear glasses as I have very short-sighted vision, so the fact that I could even see the color of its eyes really brought me to attention. I have never felt primal fear before this moment. I've heard and read stories about people saying that they experience primal fear and just assume that it was just another level of scared. I've never been so wrong though. Honestly, I felt like prey. I felt like I was about to die. That's when I started crying, silently though. I couldn't make any noise really, and it just wasn't coming out, I guess, and I couldn't move either. People I've told this experience to say that it was sleep paralysis, but I know for a fact that it wasn't. But as I'm trying to shout out for my mum, nothing but air comes out. This thing starts like walking or floating. I'm not even sure, but it made its way into my room. It made the 10-foot frame from the doorway to my bed, and then moved around to the far side of my bed. It was a king-size one, and I always slept on the right side, nearest the door. I must have had some wrappers or something on the floor because I could hear it rustling the plastic or stepping on whatever was on the floor. I'm still pretty much paralyzed and crying with fear at this point. This thing just stood next to the left side of my bed and just watched me. Now, the reason that I know that this wasn't sleep paralysis was because I managed to roll onto my right side, facing away from whatever was now standing next to my bed, and I laid there for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. It felt much longer than that at the time, but that's pretty much what I gauged before I blacked out. People wake up from sleep paralysis. They don't black out, right? So that's another thing. But that was the last thing that I remember before waking up like usual on my side, bedroom door closed and daylight coming through my curtains. Everything felt normal. Now, obviously I had trouble sleeping for about 2 weeks after this, terrified about seeing that woman again, but just as soon as I started to forget about it and started sleeping regularly again, I was randomly awoken again one night. Now this time was different because I woke up on my front in the recovery position, how I would normally sleep. I was in a deep sleep and had been asleep for hours, but my immediate reaction as soon as I opened my eyes was to look over my shoulder behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw a face inches from mine shoot back into the darkness. I didn't know what to do, so I just sort of rolled over, went back to sleep because I just didn't want to deal with whatever this was. I don't know if it was the same thing that walked into my room a week or 2 previously, but whatever it was made my natural instincts kick in. Wake up, look for danger. I must have felt whatever it was right next to me, and as soon as I saw it, it just backed away into the darkness. I haven't seen the demon woman or had anything similar happen since then. I'm hoping that whoever or whatever has been watching me since I was 10, I'm now 25 by the way, got as close as it wanted to me and has decided in the end to just leave me alone. It's been 2 years roughly since this happened, so I'm praying that whatever it was stays away. So, I had a pretty creepy experience with my friends in the woods this past weekend. For some context, me and my friends like to be in the forestry part of my state and just sort of hang out there. It's more peaceful to us and cooler looking, so anyway, when we got out there, we normally go down this one road that's pretty out of the way from everything. No houses on it and no street lights, and it stretches for miles with thick woods on either side. This one night, it was just me and my one friend who has never been down this road before, so I decided to show it to him. We start driving down it, and I'm pretty far into it when I see a reflection of what looks like a license plate of a car, so I'm sort of confused because cars are never on this road, especially not at nighttime. So I decided to go a little bit past it, and it turns out to be practically a brand new Mustang on the side of the road. So I find it strange and turn around and go home. The following weekend comes around and me and my friends who frequent the road go down it, and the Mustang is there again, but this time it's in a different spot, with a white towel sticking out of the window. We find it odd and check it out to make sure that no one needs help or anything like that, and the inside looks new as well. So we brush it off but keep it in the back of our minds at this point. The next day we go back and it's again in a different spot but still has the white towel sticking out of the window. So this time I take a picture of the plates and try to run them, but notice that it's parked in the only spot on the road where there's no service, which is really weird, so we start driving back towards home to get a connection, and I run on the plates but nothing really comes up with an internet search. We decided to stake out the car and see if someone comes to get it. So that night rolls around and we're sitting in my friend's car trying to look at this Mustang that's about 100 feet in front of us when me and my friend decided to get out and go take a look with our flashlights. We walk up to the car, but there's really nothing weird about it. We don't hear anything. There's no bugs or anything either. We decided to walk into this little clearing in the woods that I knew about and sort of take a look around. As we're standing there yelling hello and we like your Mustang, we start to hear whispers, it seems, and see movement. And then all of a sudden, me and my friend think we hear our friends talking, so at that, we start to run back to the car and we hear footsteps behind us following us. We get back and they said that they weren't talking that loud, and from that far away we wouldn't be able to hear anything anyway. My friend driving decides to drive up to the side of the Mustang to where his lights are shining on the driver's side door, and my one friend jokingly starts to video this. We don't see anything, and so in the end we just head back. But when we check back on the video, you can clearly see a person just standing there in the woods. And there's another person that you can't clearly make out, but they're behind a tree. I don't know what's going on with that Mustang, and I don't know what those people are doing down there, but the whole thing seems really weird. It's been about 10 years since this happened, but I still remember things pretty clearly. I should note too that this is told from my perspective, and I wish that I could get my mother's perspective on it as well. She just doesn't remember the events as well as I do, I guess, but for context, I lived in a mid-sized city in the southern United States, where the main thing to do at that time was to go to the mall. Sure, we had movie theaters and a couple of bowling alleys, but besides that, there really wasn't much to the city. My mum worked at a department store located in the mall though, and having nothing better to do, I would regularly go and sit in the break room while she worked. It gave me a reason to get out of the house, and if I wanted to, I was allowed to walk around the mall or get something to snack on in the food court. Honestly though, I was shy and preferred to just stay cooped up in the break room, playing video games on my Nintendo 3DS. My mum's co-workers were generally very sweet to me and frequently popped in to say hello or just to check on me during the downtime. If I was lucky enough to go with my mum on weekends, I could usually convince my mum to pick up my friend as well. We were actually dating, but since we were both goth girls, I didn't want that to get out, just to go along with us. Going to the mall meant that I was free from doing any chores at home, and it was a cheap way to sneak a secret date in every now and then. My girlfriend, though, never really liked staying in the break room with me. She always wanted to walk around the mall. I should note too that she really enjoyed taking walks, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to want to do this at the mall as well. I just didn't like walking as much as she did, I guess, so I tried to weasel my way out of it whenever I could. I could usually convince her to just walk over to a nearby store and look around, or to just go grab something from the food court rather than walking, but I noticed pretty quickly that she wasn't trying to actually get me to walk around. She just didn't want to be in the break room for whatever reason. Now, my girlfriend was more perceptive to things than I was, and I assume that she just didn't like the ambience of the break room for some reason. For a little while, I let it go too, but eventually I got frustrated and asked directly what was really bothering her about the break room. I thought she was going to tell me that it was just too cramped, or the lights randomly cutting off made her uneasy, the things that bothered me about it too, but no. What she told me was that she heard things in the ceiling, like someone was walking around in there. I had learned from my mother that there was a room in the ceiling, but it wasn't for walking around in, it was for maintenance. Most of the stuff in there was just wiring and insulation, but technically someone could be up there. So I told my girlfriend this and said that it was likely an employee up there to try and fix stuff. She said that that was fine, but she didn't really like it and still preferred walking around or sitting in the food court. I understood her discomfort and I wanted to help, so I agreed. We had a really good relationship in the sense of communication, and though I got frustrated, I wanted to make sure that she felt comfortable. Later that day, I mentioned what my girlfriend had told me and asked what they were fixing in the ceiling. My mum, though, just looked distressed and said that they hadn't been up there fixing anything that day, but she wanted me to see something. My mum took me into the receiving room of the department store, which was just a room off in the back filled with boxes and random junk the store was going to put out for sale or whatever. But the layout of this room was sort of like an L shape. One part of the L was used for receiving, but the other part was the way into the ceiling. I should clarify for this next part that to get into the ceiling, the store would have to call for the mall's maintenance team. They didn't have a ladder or anything on hand to climb up in there, as it would have been a safety hazard. The only thing that this particular area had was a hatch that led into the ceiling, and that was it. So, needless to say, I was horrified to see what appeared to be claw marks leading up the wall to the hatch. I still remember the way that they looked too, brown gashes that had been dug into the concrete wall of the receiving room. I asked my mum if it was a prank, but she told me that this wasn't the first time that it had happened, and she had had no way of knowing that I would even ask about it. According to her, these weird carvings had shown up several times over the course of a few months. Each time, the store would call in the mall security and maintenance teams, who would clean the wall up and then go into the ceiling to investigate. Nothing had ever come out from their searches, though, and they eventually gave up dealing with the marks and the issue. The only explanation mall security could give was that it was likely a homeless individual who had made their way into the ceiling by sheer willpower and happened to be very good at hiding during the searches. I stopped staying at the mall with my mum after that, and anytime I wanted my girlfriend to come over, we found somewhere else to go during the day. Sometimes she'd just come over to my house and we'd watch TV or whatever, but I didn't feel safe going back to the Breakroom after that. I knew that nothing had happened up until that point, but I just didn't want to risk it, honestly. For context, I'm a sophomore in college in a house full of 4 girls, including myself. We live in the student housing sector and went all out for Halloween decorations, girly ones at that. We live facing towards the main street of the neighborhood, and our backyard has a bunch of trees and bushes. There's also a little trail to the back door, but it is in a really weird place and is away from the main sidewalk. In terms of our actual house, there is a rather large window on our back door, and we didn't have any window coverings, so it was clear as day to see into our whole bottom floor when looking through it. I know that we should have covered it up sooner, but we didn't think that this was an urgent matter. Now, one night, my roommate and I were watching a movie and both fell asleep on the couch. I never sleep on that couch, and neither does she. It's super uncomfortable. In fact, we both woke up at separate times this night and just decided to stay on the couch rather than walking the 10 steps to our room. Looking back, I feel that it was just a little intuition that we had, or even a guardian angel that made us do this. We also had fallen asleep with almost every light imaginable on, so anyone peering through any window could see us on the couch clearly and all of our girly decor. It was about 5 in the morning, and I get woken up by my roommate shaking me saying, B, get up, there's somebody trying to get in." I instantly shoot up hearing that, see her terrified face looking at the back door, then instantly turn my head. And I see a man standing with a hoodie on, holding a flashlight, trying to pick our lock. I can still remember the scratching noise that he made with, well, whatever he was using. It definitely was not the sound of keys jingling or anything, more of a thin wire against metal sound. As we were both staring at him at this point, frozen in fear, he stopped. All 3 of us were just looking at each other for about a minute, when he slowly backed away from the door. My first instinct was to run to the door and make sure it was locked. I've never been so scared walking up to a door like that, and I never want to feel like that again. We quickly called the police and some friends in the area. The police came about 45 minutes later and they just told us to call if anything else happens. They said that it could be a drunk college student or a person with bad intentions, but we will never know. I still get a sick feeling thinking about it and hope that it was just a drunk mistake, but something tells me that it was not. We quickly installed more cameras, door window stoppers, and covers for every part of the house after that. 3 weeks later, and we actually had a break-in, but that's a story for another time. I am interested in hearing people's thoughts about this, though, and if you have any insights as to whether or not this person was just a drunk college guy, or if they were actually trying to break in. This happened to me years ago when I was about 13 or maybe 14. I grew up in a small to mid-sized city in the West, pretty safe in a quiet middle-class neighborhood. This was back when I was still bought into organized religion and I was going to an overnight lock-in at the church gym. For the non-Christian kids who aren't familiar, it's basically a huge Jesus-focused sleepover for teens. The church was only about a 10 to 12 minute walk from my house, and the quickest way to get there was to cut across a park right next to the elementary school. This was the early 2000s, so I definitely grew up in the age of stranger danger and teaching girls to always be vigilant. On the other hand, I was walking a short distance through my own neighborhood to the church, and I was very responsible for my age. I was an older sister, always the babysitter, and my parents had okayed me walking by myself and would drop by with my sleeping bag and pillow after they picked up my little brother from practice. I was running a little bit late, so the sun was just setting as I approached the park. As I crunched my way across the grass next to the tennis courts, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Turning my head, I saw a figure, clearly a man, dressed in dark clothing and leaning against the brick wall of the school. He was kind of tucked into an alcove formed where the building met the fence around the playground, out of sight from the road, and the man was standing just outside of the halo of the light from the lamp above a nearby door. The man was just sort of lounging in the crux of the wall and the fence, but what initially caught my eye was the flicker of the lit cigarette in his mouth. It was too dark to see his features, but I could tell, as I noticed him, that he was already watching me. He was a fair distance away across the grass, but it was just open space between us at this point. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them on me. I then felt that uneasy tingle creep down my spine. I suddenly realized that I was alone in the growing dark, and he was some unknown man tracking me with his eyes that I couldn't make out. Instead of continuing to cut diagonally across the park, I veered right toward the sidewalk and the street so that I wouldn't come too close to him. I walked a little faster, trying to shake off my uneasiness, telling myself, "You're just being silly." The first time I glanced back, he hadn't moved, though I could still feel him watching me. As I left the grass of the park and approached the street corner, I felt briefly relieved. I was back under the street lamps, which by now had flicked on. Only 3 or 4 short blocks until I was at the church. I glanced once more to reassure myself that I had worried for no reason, expecting to see nothing. I mean, by now the man should be completely out of view. Instead, though, I felt the pit of dread in my stomach turn to acidic fear when I realized that the man was in fact halfway across the park now, walking in my direction. I immediately crossed to the other side of the street and began walking faster. At this point, I could feel the adrenaline rushing through me. I didn't have any real words or images to describe what I thought would happen to me, just a jumble of snippets of news reports and vague fears about what happens to young girls out alone at night. I was still trying to convince myself that it could just be a coincidence. The man could just be walking in the same direction. After another block, as I approached the next corner, I looked back again. The man had now reached the edge of the park, and instead of walking straight ahead, he too had crossed the street to my side. Even worse, it seemed like he had closed some of the distance between us, and to my eyes at least, it seemed like he was walking faster now. I immediately felt my terror increase. At this point, I was convinced that he was a predator, and I had made myself easy prey by being here. I still had 2.5 blocks to the church, but at this point, I was wondering whether I would ever make it to the lock-in. I glanced back at the man once more, and he had closed the gap even further with his longer legs. I still couldn't clearly see his face, but I had seen enough. I turned around and I started all out sprinting up the street. My backpack thumped against my back, my heart raced, my breath turned shallow. I ran all the way to the church parking lot before I looked back again, and by the time that I did, the man was gone. But I could have sworn that I heard feet slapping the pavement as I was running. To this day, I don't really know if that man was after me, although I do lean on the side that he was, or if he just thought that I was some weird kid running down the street at dusk. Frankly, I'm actually pretty glad to have never found out, one way or the other. I'm not going to preface this post with I know this sounds crazy, because, well, it isn't. This is a regular experience I've had over several years of dog-sitting gigs at a turn-of-the-20th-century mansion in my neighborhood. A friend of mine will also dog-sit at the house if there are dates that I'm unavailable, and she shares this experience too, and often feels like she needs to pretend that she's somewhere else in order to get through it. So, I met a really nice family through a friend who were looking for a dog sitter for their puppy back in the fall of 2020. I started doing a long weekend every few months, and then the owner asked me to help her out for the spring breaks or summer trips that they couldn't include their dog on. The house is absolutely beautiful and is a precious landmark home in our historic neighborhood. It's big without feeling imposing, and you can tell that the owner loves taking care of it. She decorates to make every nook and sitting area comfortable and inviting, and there are beautiful family photos all over the walls. In short, it's a catalog home. And most importantly, the dog is a very good boy. I often feel quite guilty when she and I interact, because as beautiful and welcoming as her home looks, it makes me feel absolutely awful. Whenever I stay there, I feel completely exhausted. I have a hard time moving. I feel listless, deeply sad, and strangely scared to leave the house as well. Usually, the longer that I stay there, the more agoraphobic I feel. When I do muster a ton of effort to go out to buy groceries or run an errand, I always feel like I'm not alone, like as if something has followed me, and I dread returning to the house. I am an active person, and I usually wake up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, so it's unusual for me to feel so heavy and unable to do things. I have also heard footsteps around the house and often wake up sweaty and terrified in the night with no apparent cause. I saw my boyfriend briefly yesterday, and he commented on noticing a big difference in me compared to 2 days prior, before I went to the house. I didn't really know what to say to describe how I felt and how I was acting, and he was so worried he thought in a matter of 2 days I had decided I wanted to break up. We've been in that disgusting phase of love that everyone talks about, but today was my last day in the house after 3 days, and after yesterday, I knew I had to fight this energy demon, for lack of a better word, and go for a walk at the park. It was spectacular, and I was out for about 3 hours. With each step, I felt more of my energy evaporate from my body, even off my sweater. When I returned to the house to pack up my things, play with Doggo, and let him out one last time, I felt like the energy returned full force. The words that I would use to describe that feeling was like it was a spiritual assault, I guess. I tidied up the house and gathered all my bags, but the whole time it felt like some energy or spirit was arguing with me not to leave, and following me each step that I took, even in and out of the bathroom. As is usual for my stays at the house, the energy completely vanished the second that I finished the dog-sitting gig and stepped out of the house for the last time of that gig. I've been saying no to this very nice dog owner more and more over the last year, and my friend who needs extra money has been helping out. I warned my friend that this house has a really strange vibe, and her first time over there, she texted me very early on that she felt super off, and we have compared experiences ever since. Another friend of mine hung out with me there when I was really lonely and depressed because of the house, and she very quickly became off too. I know that this kind of sounds like The Shining, but the best way that I can describe this feeling is that the house, or something inside of it, wants to slowly drain me until I completely melt into it and become a part of the house. I know it sounds like psychosis, but I can feel something battling with me every time that I try to leave, and something draining my battery every time I give up and stay. I've considered the usual environmental suggestions like mold and gas leaks, as it's an older home, but just before I started sitting there, they did a full renovation including inspections, and the family seems very nice and happy from my interactions. The only slightly off thing I noticed is that the owner, though very kind, is very paranoid and anxious. She often mentions how desperately she needs to get away when she asks me to dog sit. But heck, who isn't anxious these days, right? This house, though, is just a standing paradox. It looks like an all-American home. It's bright, full of light, and checks the boxes of every HGTV lover's wish list. But I absolutely, deeply dread it. There is something wrong with it. So around 11 years ago, I was a telecoms engineer. The normal day went to a few residential houses, either fitted or fixed phone lines. Everything was no different from any other day. But then I downloaded my next job and I got a 20-line installation. Now, this is not the norm for the role that I had, as these tasks usually went to other teams, really. No issues though. I thought that it would be nice to be somewhere for longer than an hour or two, I guess. Better than being here and there and everywhere, I suppose. And I called the contact. It's a contact center who tells me that either the caretaker or manager of the building is aware and will explain what was required when I get there. So I arrive, and it's a really old building built in the 1920s, I later found out. I make my way in, tester and tool bag, as is the norm, and after speaking with the receptionist, I discover that the building was at one point a nursing home, and after being derelict for a few years, it's now being used as offices for various businesses. As promised, two managers arrived to tell me that they think what I am looking for is in the cellar, as there's a lot of cables down there, and that's all that they really know. So I asked if the caretaker is about, as they usually know these types of things. I was told that he wasn't, as he was ill, but due back in the next day or two. I follow this man and woman to a number-padlocked door, and they open it, tell me the code, and on the other side of the door is a stairwell that just leads down to the cellar. So as we get down there, the light is pretty poor. In fact, it's really poor, I guess, but I have no chance of working like this, and I mean, there were lights, yes, but you're talking to pendant lights that weren't really great, and understanding this, the woman tells me that they have hanging lights, so no issues. I go back to the van, grab an extension, and head back towards the cellar. So as I'm passing the receptionist, she asked us, "Are you going to be in the cellar on your own?" So I just replied, "Yeah, sometimes you have to, but if what I'm looking for isn't there, I won't be for long, I guess." She laughed, but told me, "Better you than me. Nobody likes going down there, even for storage space." Now, I'll be honest, I just thought people don't like stairs to a dark place. No worries, but not something I'm unfamiliar with, so it just needs to be done. And after a quick look around with the make manager, we find a socket. I sort the lights, and Yep, there is the DP that I'm looking for, but it's an older sort of solder block, no good for broadband, so I let him know that this is going to take a bit longer, and this is even before knowing where these 20 lines need to go. He just agrees and shows me where the office fitters have left all the cables for the clients, which to my relief was in the cupboard behind the receptionist. So all set, knowing what I know, I now crack on. I'm testing all the lines and it's going pretty well. I've more than half gone through all the cabinets and a few shy, but I know the area and know from there I can get them through, as it's got 200 pair cables that run through it. At this point, it's around 4 o'clock and I don't have the blocks that I need on the van, so tag up the cables and turn off all the lights on my way out before closing, and lock the door on the way out too. I sign out and tell the girl at the desk I'll see her tomorrow, and I leave. On my way home, I call my manager to tell them the script and that I may actually need a hand for half a day or more, as I'm not even sure anything has been done in the exchange yet. The next day, 8 a.m., I get a call from one of the other lads who tells me that he's with me all day, and that's all that he knows. We sort out a role each, and I'll push the pairs from the box to the cab, and you do the cab and exchange if needed, and it's just a case of fitting the box and running a large internal cable from the box to behind the receptionist. I make my way into the building once again, open the door with the code, and to my surprise, all the lights are on. Now, I am 100% sure that I turned them off, so I'm guessing one of the managers may have come to check if I was still there and left them on by mistake. I go down and do what I need to do and leave to push through the cables outside, call my mate, and he's getting them by one, and so it's all going well. I finish up and I head back to fit the block. As I grab the blocks, drill and all the bits and etc., set up mark for the pilot holes and just hear, "What are you doing?" After nearly jumping out of my skin, I turn and see this man with grey overalls on. So I say, "I'm just doing what's been asked of me. Are you the caretaker?" He replies that he is, and he says that nobody has been down here for years, and he was surprised that I was there. So I just cracked on, done the drilling, etc. And then as soon as I'd stopped with the drill and it was quieter, this guy just sort of started chatting away, like, "What football team do you support? Do you mind if I watch what you're doing?" I told him no worries and just tried to be polite as I could. He then told me that his name was Gordon and that he'd been working there for over 30 years. A bit confused, recalling that the receptionist had said that I told him that I was under the impression that this place had been empty for a few years, and looking at the cabling, it's been updated for at least 15 to 20 years. He just said that things are always happening here. After about an hour of back and forth while I'm working, I hear a hello from the top of the stairwell. Expecting Gordon to answer, I didn't. Then it came again, so I turned around and Gordon has gone now. I'm thinking that I've been waffling for 10 minutes and he's not even here. I pop up and it's one of the managers asking if I'm expecting somebody, another engineer, so I apologize and explain the phone signal isn't very good down there, so he probably hasn't been able to get a hold of me. All cleared. He comes down, we chat for 5, and he tells me that we'll start at the receptionist stand and work to me while I finish. After a quick toilet break, I go back down and I'm in the final stages now. I'm just putting phone numbers to pairs as for when my mate gets there, we can connect the test and go. As I'm doing this, I hear, "Sorry about that." Again, out of nowhere, it's Gordon. So I just acknowledge it, call him clever, and make a joke that if they can't find you, they can't ask you to do anything. I continue for 5 minutes and I've done all that I can, so I tell him that I'm just heading up to assist my mate and we'll be done soon and out of the way. Gordon then told me that he liked the company and it's been nice to talk. I felt saddened at this point, thinking that he was maybe treated poorly by people that I'm in the building with. So I just said, "Of course, mate, costs nothing to be nice and have a chat." So I go up the stairs, leaving Gordon down there and help get the cable through a void and into the cellar. 10-20 minutes of trying to fish it through, we got it and we go down, and Gordon is not around and we finish. My mate tells me it's time for food and he'll go to the chippy and meet me back at the yard as I tell him that I just need a few signatures and to make sure the lights go back on so that I can get my extension lead. I get what I need from the manager's signatures and show him where the link is behind the reception. I inform him that I need to get my extension lead, so are the lights okay there for now and all that? Or does he want me to move them as we go and there's a good light? And he states that they might as well stay for now and he'll get another lead in case anybody else needs to go down there. I head down and start unplugging the lights and Gordon appears again telling me that he didn't realize the lights were mine as he wouldn't have touched them. Straight away I thought, so that's why they were on this morning. But then it dawned on me that the door, it was locked. I asked him if he came down yesterday evening and he said, "Yes, of course, I'm always here. It's where I'm needed." Confused and just wanting to disappear at this point, I said, "No worries, nice to meet you," and I place my hand and put it to shake out. He just raises his hand and says, "Hope to see you soon." So that was a bit weird, but I left, signed out, and thought nothing of it. So weeks go by, and I get a call from our control asking if I can return to this address as one of the lines isn't working and it's high level. So I say, yeah, no worries. I get there, say hello again to the receptionist. I asked if I could just check behind her first before having to go into the cellar. With some joy, it ends up being there. It just needs to be put on properly. And as I'm sorting it out, an older guy, he asks me if I was the one who was there last week. I say yes. He apologized and stated that he was the caretaker and had to take more days off than planned. I just told him, don't worry about it, man. I'm sure Gordon will tell you where everything is. And as soon as I said this, he just looked me dead in the eyes and said, "What did you just say?" So I said, "Gordon. He told me that he's the caretaker here." This guy went absolutely white and just asked me if we could talk outside. So, of course, I followed him and he simply asked me if I believed in ghosts. Then he told me that before this was what it was today, it was a nursing home and the old caretaker, his name was actually Gordon. He knew this as when the building was taken over, he found an old desk to do lists and letters and requests for a Gordon, and there was a sign on the door which said caretaker, and where this desk was, that door led to the cellar. I immediately rubbished this, obviously, and started laughing, thinking him and his mate were just pulling my leg. He then asked me, though, if he was wearing overalls, which I replied he was. He just sort of looked at me dead in the eye and said, "Listen, mate, I'm not lying. Gordon passed away years ago, supposedly on the job. I just thought you should know, and it's not something that's considered funny, telling me that he has been mocked as he has also seen Gordon, but people just have never believed him. And I never really said a thing to anybody beyond that. Until one night fishing with a friend, and just like he said, he thought that I was just messing around. But I know what I saw and I know what I heard. I don't normally tell this to anybody as it's just not really worth the ridicule, but after this experience, all I can say is that I guess ghosts or spirits, they're real. The summer of 2008 was a really rough time to graduate from college. I had just spent 4 years getting a degree, only to find out that the job market had all but dried up. As bummed out as I was about being unemployed for the foreseeable future, I found a deep appreciation for backcountry camping and hiking that summer. Growing up in the Rocky Mountains and graduating from a college in western Montana, I was not a stranger to hiking or camping. But that summer, it became an escape to the point of almost an obsession. Going on daily hikes and camping beneath the stars really helped my mental health while I worried about my life's purpose and my future. It was June though, and seasonably cold, wet and cloudy. The daytime highs barely touched 50 degrees, and at night it dropped below freezing. Despite the weather, I had planned to hike around the Anaconda Range that week, and I was going to let that deter me. My plan for the week, funny enough, was to hike from Storm Lake, over Storm Lake Pass, and down to Upper Seymour Lake. Storm Lake, actually an alpine reservoir, is a challenge to get to and requires a 4x4 pickup and some skilled driving too. The road is a narrow 2-track winding its way through the thick pine forests. The way was slick with rain, but I made it to the top with little heartburn. I set up camp on the north shore of the lake and I decided to do some fishing. The fishing, it was miserable. It was cold and nothing was biting. But the best thing about bad fishing is that my thoughts were free to wander while I sat on the shore. The rain was a constant light drizzle and created a natural white noise, which was nice. Time passed and my daydreams were cut short as a low rumble from up the canyon overtook the sounds of the rain. The rumbling was not unlike a distant diesel engine, I guess, but there are no roads that go beyond where I was camped. No machinery or vehicles could be up that canyon too. Maybe it's a plane, I thought, looking up in the rain clouds. But the sound wasn't getting closer or further away, and the sound was above me. It came from beyond the lake and up into the canyon. But the sound was sort of stationary, I guess, and constant. This was most certainly not a plane or a truck or a bulldozer. And while all of this wasn't outright scary, nevertheless my hair stood on end while I sat there listening. After 20 minutes, the rumbling faded away and I was left again with only the sound of the raindrops. Soon enough, I caught a decent-sized trout, cleaned it, and I headed back to camp to get ready for dinner. The fish cooked up fine, but to be honest, I hate trout, so... it's edible, sure, but totally unappetizing, for me anyway. They just taste like mud, I guess, and I ate as much as I could stand and tossed the rest into the lake. Building up my fire for the night, I sat back to enjoy the evening with a bit of whiskey. Night came fast, too. The mountain ridges put the sun to bed early here, and the rain clouds obscured the starlight as well. It was dark, in fact, really dark that night. The sounds of a crackling warm fire and the rain bouncing off my tent were a great comfort, and starting to lull me to sleep. I reminded myself that I needed to build up the fire before bed, so I walked over to my pile of scavenged firewood and grabbed an armful. But being away from the fire's crackling for a moment, I could pick up that all too familiar rumbling rising in the background again. It was growing louder than before and closer as well. I thought to myself that I may have had a few too many pulls of whiskey and was tired and grouchy. This noise was ruining my camping trip and my buzz as well. So frustrated, I yelled into the blackness of the night, "Hey, shut up!" And like a switch being flipped, the rumbling stopped, and so did the rain. I will admit that at that, my heart skipped a beat. I realized that was not a convenient coincidence. There was an intelligence out there, something sentient, observing me and responding to my screams, and I wasn't getting the most positive vibes from it too. I threw all the logs on the fire and I retreated back to my tent. More on edge than ever, I just sort of sat there, listening to the fire crackling, to my rapid breathing, and beyond that to the silence of the darkness. Before this moment, I had felt alone but safe. Now, I felt alone and vulnerable. Beyond where the firelight faded, I felt as if there were a million eyes in that dark, watching me. My paranoia began to subside when the rain suddenly started again. Not a drizzle, but a massive downpour too. I was glad that I had built up the fire, or it would have been snuffed out for sure. Unfortunately, though, my tent was being pushed down by the force of the storm. I thought about bailing to the truck, but I knew that I would be soaked to the bone instantly. Risking injury or death over getting wet is the kind of logic only whiskey can produce, right? I could feel the rainwater pooling and moving under my tent. This storm wasn't letting up. The urge to get into the pickup and drive away was even more tantalizing. I could get my stuff tomorrow in the daylight and spend a few nights in town, but I'd had a bit too much to drink. Driving, especially on that slick, muddy 2-track road, would have been a death sentence for sure, I thought. But I still needed a safer place to sleep than a wimpy tent. So, grabbing what I could, I ripped open the tent flaps and I ran for the truck. I was soaking wet by the time that I settled into the driver's seat and locked the doors. Turning the heat on full blast, I hoped that would dry me out. It was going to be a miserable night though, so I reclined my chair and tried to calm my thoughts with deep breaths. The rain wasn't letting up. I was warm from the heater, thankfully, and I was riding the crest of a good whiskey buzz. The fire was still raging despite the rain, and kept the campsite well lit. Now, I remember the truck's clock reading 1:06 a.m. Then I blinked. It was only a moment, but when I opened my eyes, the rain had suddenly stopped. In fact, it was foggy and quiet. The once raging campfire was now just embers, and the weirdest thing was that there was morning twilight to the east. I instantly looked at the truck's clock, and it now read 5:45 a.m. It was morning. That couldn't be right. Almost 5 hours gone in the blink of an eye? I must have passed out or something. My head was killing me all of a sudden too. To be honest, I didn't feel like I had drank that much to justify that kind of hangover. I turned off the truck and I stepped out to survey the night's damage. My tent was now completely flattened. The tent poles were shattered to pieces. Everything was soaking wet, and smothering the remains of the fire, I dragged all my junk to the pickup and I tossed it into the bed. My hike over the pass wasn't happening today, that was for sure. It was around 6:30 a.m. though before I finished picking up camp, and as I climbed into the cab of my truck, I then heard that rumbling again through the morning fog. As soon as I heard it, I drove out of there as fast as I could down that muddy bobsled track of a road, not once looking into the rearview mirror either. I have never been back to Storm Lake, and to be honest, I probably never will. So I was 10 years old, and back then, my friends and I would ride our bikes as far as we could, looking for adventure or to discover something new and exciting. At this time, my community was a mix of new and old, and it was easy to find an old tunnel, the remains of a farmhouse, or decayed paths and trails. So we set out that summer day with one extra boy than the usual crew. I had not formally met with him yet, but nevertheless we headed out on our bikes. We came across an abandoned house near a farmer's field and forest. We started to explore the premises, and we decided to settle here for a while. We walked in, checked things out, and we're just sort of hanging out and sharing our findings. But at some point, I started to hear the sound of rocks or gravel, or something like that, being moved through water, sort of like slurry, emanating from the basement. I thought that it was my friends playing in the house, and so I briefly ignored it. But suddenly there was wailing, and the sound of gravel was getting louder, like thrashing, like someone was throwing rocks of gravel or something. Frozen now, there was no way that my friends could make that noise. Then, all of a sudden, quite fast talking surrounded us. My one friend started to cry uncontrollably. His brother, a pretty brave kid, was preparing to protect his brother. Together, we could see inside the house's front hall and stairwells. The new boy was giggling and gesturing us to come downstairs by waving us in with his hand. But we stood there, dumbfounded. How or what was making that noise? How did he not know the immediate danger that we were in, that he was in? I wanted to get him as I thought that this was possibly his last moment on the planet, but I watched him return up from the dark stairwell leading to the basement. He was still giggling and mirroring the exact same motion. He returned again downstairs and out of sight. We screamed at him not to go, but he kept doing the exact same thing, just over and over again. He was actually sort of speeding up too, like 2 times and 3 times faster. The noises from the basement I can only really describe as just pure despair, like an agonizing, painful and doom-like quality, but they were human for sure, or at least human-like. We screamed at this guy, though, that we're leaving, and it seemed like he was coming outside with us. Frantic, we just started biking as fast as possible, petrified with fear, and I didn't look back. It was dusk now, and we had no time to reconvene, so we separated immediately and went home before we were grounded. I asked my friends the next day if anyone saw the other boy, and they responded that they thought that he was somebody else's friend from our group. We ended up talking for a little while, and we discovered that we didn't even know his name or where he came from, and after that, we actually never saw him again. So, I'm going to try and sort these events out chronologically. They happened between my 14 and 20 years of age. For context, I'm currently 22. The village in question is called Mojca. It's in Poland. I've also not lived there for like 2 years now, but an important thing that I want to mention is a warm friend of mine that I met here, Jacob. He will be crucial to several situations. So firstly, the forest itself was huge, although typical of forests in Poland, I guess. My friend and I often spent our free time there. The forest had no owner, and we loved exploring it. We built a small bridge by the stream so that we didn't have to go around it or jump over it. A few days after building it, too, when we were returning home from deeper parts of the forest, as if from a tree, a stone flew towards me, which almost hit me in the head. At the time, for a long time afterwards, we joked about it, although it was a pretty dangerous situation to be honest, because the rock was large enough probably to kill me if it hit me. Of course, we ignored it, not thinking too much of it, but it was harvest time, and as I remember, there were bales of hay in the fields at the time, which we loved to jump over. We chose fields that were more submerged in the woods so as not to risk being caught by the farmers. It was already getting dark, more slowly sunset, and on our return we saw a black figure behind a small stream, different from the first place. This forest repeatedly crossed by water. We looked at the figure for a while too, but couldn't quite make out what it was at the time. But we laughed and said that it must have been the figure that threw the stone that time. Thirdly, we saw this figure again, twice on another day, shortly after the previous incident, in the same areas. And fourthly, this is the last part where my friend was with me, and in the deeper parts of the forest we found something like rabbit holes, only bigger. We have seen rabbit dens quite often here, so I doubt that we would have been wrong, but nearby we found a traveling suitcase with strange things inside. From that moment on, too, my friend stopped attending this forest. I think something must have spooked him. I myself enjoyed running through the forest, in other parts of it, especially in the evening. I came across a phenomenon that I would mostly describe as earth-breathing, I guess you could say. In a certain area, the ground regularly rose and fell, and it was really cool to watch. But this is where things started to get weird. I covered my running route as usual, but on this day, I turned back. While running, I heard an unnatural growl from the bushes. Over the years, I've clocked wolves or foxes, but this sounded really different to that. There seemed to be nothing in the bushes too when I looked, but preferring not to tempt fate, I turned back and I went home. The growl itself was deep though and very bassy, and lastly, and probably the strangest thing, I was already of age and it was dark. It was one of the few trips after dark that I took, and I don't even remember what for, to be honest, but passing a long path in the woods, I heard not far away, but in the denser part of the forest, a kind of, I know this is going to sound weird, but choir, something like church singing. I'm not an expert, but it sounded like it was in Latin, and so I ignored it, and going back after this time, obviously, I didn't hear anything anymore. But years later, my friend and I came to the conclusion that there was probably black masses or something of that nature going on in that forest. There were also often very suspicious cars hanging around in the area for years, and I'm not a big believer myself, but to be honest, it is a possible explanation. In the end, who knows what actually all of that was, but I don't think that I'm going to go back there, just in case. So about 5 years ago, when I was 17, I visited some of my family who lived in South Dakota and worked there for the summer. After about a month, my brother, sister, and her husband decided to do what Americans do best and go shoot guns in the woods. I had to work an evening shift, so it was decided that we'd go after around 10 p.m. Once my shift ended, we went to their house to pack up the truck with some snacks, guns, and ammo. The drive took around 45 minutes, and it took us up a dirt road surrounded by trees and tall grass. Eventually, it opened up into a clearing that was pretty open and flat. The nearest tree line was about 100 feet away. It was pretty dark, but the clearing was lit up by the truck's headlights. For some reason, too, I kind of felt a bit uneasy, but I chalked that up to just being in the woods at night. For the first 20 minutes, nothing really happened, too. We were just setting up plastic bottles and those plastic gallon buckets that you get water out of at an office. But there was a feeling of being watched that we all felt, and the area suddenly just reeked of spoiled eggs. Those of you who have shotguns know what that smells like, but even since going to the military, no amount of guns, explosions have ever smelt this bad. We looked around to see if we could see the source of what it was, and what I saw, I can still vividly remember to this day. It was a thin humanoid figure crouching down, just looking at us. Even while crouching down, it was still above 6 feet in height. And when I say that this figure was thin, I mean skin and bones barely do it justice. The even weirder thing about this was, though, is that we all saw the figure in different spots in the tree line, but we all described the same features. Tall, thin, had long dark hair. Whatever the case, we quickly packed up what we could and we just left. And the feeling of dread that we felt that day will forever haunt me. Since then, my brother mentioned the area might have been in native territory, but I don't know if that's true or not. Every once in a while, I think back on that day and I look up different stories and encounters people have in those woods, but nothing ever quite resembles what I saw that day. In April 2019, I was an exchange student in South America. I went on a trip to the Amazon with a group of other exchange students. And while many strange things happened, I would like to focus on two in particular. So at the time, I was 18 years old, tall and thin and white with blue eyes, mentioned just because I always stood out as a tourist. I was fluent in Spanish, allowing me to talk to locals without misunderstandings. The first incident occurred on our first night or morning in the Colombian or Brazilian town of Leticia. We were all staying in a hotel, and it had a really strange vibe. I didn't feel comfortable, and neither did my friends. The hotel staff were staring at us like creeps, which made it even more scary. But during breakfast, I overheard other exchange students discussing a missing phone. I offered to help locate it using the Find My iPhone app, and we were able to track it down to a really sketchy part of town. The police accompanied us to the location and we found the house where the phone was. The family denied involvement, but their behavior and the fact that the phone signal was coming from their place made it clear to us that they had probably stolen it. They came out with knives and machetes, yelling and staring at us. It was really intense and I felt a shiver down my spine, and I had a very strong gut feeling that we needed to leave. We told the police to back off and not to do anything about the phone because we were worried about our safety and the phone just wasn't worth it. When we came back to the hotel, The police wanted to see if there were any cameras pointed at the door of the room from the outside of... When we came back to the hotel, the police wanted to see if there were any cameras pointed at the door of the room from the outside or the inside. The scary part is that they had cameras from the inside and outside, only these two cameras were mysteriously turned off for 2 hours that night. I also know about another incident and found out that the cameras were turned off by someone from the hotel staff. I really don't feel too comfortable sharing that, as it involved one of my friends. It was very serious and some legal actions were taken too. But one of our other stops was in a small village in Peru's part of the Amazon. I don't remember the town's name, but it had around 150 people, and the village was built on pillars above the water as the river Amazon was overflowing or something. After we arrived and settled in at the local hotel, we were taken to a stage where we were introduced to the region's indigenous dances, songs, and culture. After the performance, the group returned to the hotel, but I decided to stay back and talk to some of the locals. I wanted to see an anaconda, very dumb and touristy, I know, but someone had told me that this was a good time to see them hunt. I started talking to a local guy, and he claimed that he couldn't show me where to see a live anaconda, but offered to show me a picture of one that he had taken a few days ago on his phone. Now, despite what my parents always taught me about going to strangers' houses, I foolishly decided to follow him to this remote, isolated home deeper in the jungle. As we walked, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease and danger, though, lurking around every corner. When we arrived, he instructed me to wait in the living room while he searched for his phone, but as I stood alone in the dimly lit room, my gut told me that something was wrong. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was in grave danger all of a sudden. After what felt like an eternity, he returned and said that he couldn't find his phone. He asked me to come back the next day, but I knew that I had to get out of there as soon as I could. I thanked him and left, but my heart was pounding with fear and adrenaline. When I returned to the hotel and told my friends what had happened, they were horrified. They couldn't believe that I put myself in such a dangerous situation. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something terrible could have happened if I had stayed any longer. Looking back, I realized that the encounter was bizarre, even if he was truly just a kind person, but I just cannot shake off that feeling that something was about to happen to me. It scares me to think about how gullible I was back then. Even though I consider myself rational and sometimes even paranoid, I didn't listen to my instincts that day. And I genuinely think that I put myself in a lot of danger.